They say the weakest wolves die first in winter. Lyra Ashen should have been dead 100 times over, but on the day she pulled a king from freezing water with her bare hands, everything changed. This is the story of a girl beaten into silence, poisoned into weakness, and laughed at as worthless, until the ice shattered and she became the only one brave enough, or stupid enough, to dive into death itself. What happened next shocked an entire pack and rewrote the rules of power forever. Stay until the end to see how the invisible became unstoppable. Drop your city in the comments and smash that like button. The first rule of survival in the Frostfang pack was simple. Stay quiet, stay small, stay forgotten. Lyra Ashen had mastered all three. She moved through the pack house like smoke, present but never noticed, essential but never valued. 21 years of existing in the margins had taught her how to read a room in half a heartbeat, how to disappear when voices rose, how to make herself so unremarkable that eyes slid past her like water off ice. This morning was no different. She kept her head down as she scrubbed dried blood from the training hall floor, her knees aching against the cold stone, her fingers raw and cracked despite the rags wrapped around them. The metallic smell clung to everything. It always did. "Move faster, Wolfless!" The voice cut through the early morning silence like a blade. Lyra didn't flinch. Flinching only made it worse, but her shoulders tensed as she recognized the speaker. Kyle Ironfang, third son of the Beta bloodline, built like a sledgehammer and twice as subtle. "Yes, warrior," Lyra murmured, scrubbing harder at a particularly stubborn stain. Someone had bled heavily here yesterday. Probably another challenge match. The pack loved their violence, loved watching wolves tear into each other for rank and respect. She'd never understand it. Then again, she'd never shifted, never felt her wolf rise beneath her skin, never experienced the rush of power that came with the change. According to everyone who mattered, that made her less than nothing. "Disgusting," Kyle muttered, stepping closer. His boots, polished, expensive, probably worth more than everything Lyra owned, stopped inches from her hand. "You've been at this spot for 10 minutes. Are you stupid or just lazy?" Both, probably, by their standards. But Lyra had learned years ago that answering back only earned bruises, so she kept quiet and attacked the bloodstain with renewed vigor. "I asked you a question, mistake." Mistake. That's what they called her. Not even an insult with creativity behind it, just a flat statement of fact. Lyra Ashen, the girl who should never have been born, the weakling daughter of wolves who died in shame, leaving her as a permanent stain on the pack's reputation. "I'm working as fast as I can," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the floor. "The blood set overnight. It takes time." His boot caught her in the ribs. Not hard enough to break anything. They'd learned to be careful about that after the pack healer had complained about wasting supplies on her, but enough to send her sprawling across the wet stone, her bucket of dirty water overturning with a crash that echoed through the empty hall. "Clumsy, too." Kale's laugh was ugly, sharp-edged. "Clean that up. And if you're still here when the warriors arrive for morning drills, I'll make sure you regret it." He walked away, his footsteps fading, leaving Lyra alone with the spilled water and the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest. She didn't cry, hadn't cried in years. Tears were another luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she pushed herself up slowly, testing her ribs with careful fingers. Bruised, definitely. Maybe cracked. Hard to tell anymore. Her body was a patchwork of old injuries that never quite healed right, layers of damage that had become so normal she barely registered the pain unless it was fresh. The water had spread across half the hall. Of course it had, because nothing in Lyra's life was ever simple, ever easy. She found more rags and got to work. By the time the sun broke over the mountains, Lyra had finished the training hall and moved on to the kitchens. Her stomach growled, a constant companion, but she knew better than to eat before the pack had been fed. Servants ate last, if there was anything left. Usually there wasn't. "You're late." Martha, the head cook, didn't look up from the massive pot she was stirring. The woman was built like a bear and had a temperament to match, but she'd never hit Lyra. That put her in a category all her own. "Sorry, there was a spill." "There's always something." Martha gestured toward the mountain of potatoes waiting to be peeled. "Get started. We've got 200 wolves to feed and the Convergence guests start arriving this afternoon." Right. The Frost Convergence. Lyra had almost forgotten, though that seemed impossible given how the entire pack had been buzzing about it for weeks. Once every 5 years, the strongest packs from across the northern territories gathered on sacred ground, the frozen lake at the heart of Frostfang land, to witness challenges, forge alliances, and prove dominance. Alphas came from hundreds of miles away, bringing their fiercest warriors and their deadliest ambitions. It was politics and violence wrapped in ceremony, and Lyra wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. "How many guests?" she asked, reaching for a knife and the first potato. 50, maybe more. "The Alpha King himself is coming." Lyra's hand stilled. "The king?" Everyone knew about Theron Vex, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, a wolf so powerful that even speaking his name felt dangerous. He ruled the largest pack in living memory, commanded absolute loyalty, and had never lost a challenge. Some said he was blessed by the old gods. Others said he'd made a deal with something darker. Lyra didn't believe in either, but she believed in power. And Theron Vex had more of it than anyone alive. "Don't get any ideas," Martha said sharply, though her eyes held something that might have been concern. "You stay in the kitchens during the ceremony. You stay out of sight. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "I mean it, girl. These alphas, they're not like the wolves here. They're worse, crueler. They see weakness. They destroy it. You go anywhere near that lake, and—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Just stay hidden." Yes, it should have been insulting, being told to hide like a shameful secret. But Lyra had long since stopped being insulted by the truth. She was weak. She was an embarrassment, and if powerful alphas saw her, they'd see exactly what everyone else did. A mistake that should have been corrected years ago. "I'll stay in the kitchens," Lyra promised. She meant it too. At least she did right up until she didn't. The guests arrived in waves throughout the afternoon. Massive wolves with eyes like winter stars, warriors who moved with casual violence, females who carried themselves like queens. Lyra watched from the kitchen windows as they gathered in the main courtyard, all of them radiating the kind of power she'd never possess. She should have felt jealous, should have felt bitter. Instead, she just felt tired. "Lyra!" Martha's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop gawking and start plating. The welcoming feast begins in an hour." The next 60 minutes blurred into chaos. Lyra worked alongside the other servants, though alongside was generous since they made a point of never speaking to her, never acknowledging her unless absolutely necessary, preparing enough food to feed an army. Roasted venison, honey-glazed boar, winter vegetables swimming in butter, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she ignored it. She'd gotten good at ignoring things. The feast itself was held in the Great Hall, a massive stone chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Long tables stretched the length of the room, packed with wolves laughing, drinking, shouting. The noise was overwhelming, a physical thing that pressed against Lyra's skin as she moved between tables, refilling cups and clearing plates. No one looked at her. She'd perfected the art of being furniture. At the head table, Alpha Garrick Frostfang held court, his voice booming as he welcomed the guests. He was a brutal wolf, all hard edges and barely controlled violence, but he knew how to play politics when necessary. Beside him sat his son, Magnus, the heir, the golden child, everything an alpha should be. And there, 3 seats down, sat the Alpha King. Lyra had been carefully not looking at him all evening, some instinct warning her that drawing his attention would be catastrophic. But as she approached the head table to refill wine cups, she couldn't help stealing a glance. Theron Vex was not what she'd expected. Oh, the power was there. It rolled off him in waves, making the air feel thick and charged. But he didn't look like a monster. He looked tired, bored almost, as he listened to Garrick drone on about territory boundaries and old grievances. His eyes, though, they were the color of winter sky just before a storm, and when they shifted, just for a heartbeat, and landed on Lyra, she felt it like a physical touch. She dropped her gaze immediately, her heart hammering. Stupid. So stupid. Don't look at the king. Don't draw attention. Don't! You there? The voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a knife through silk. Everyone at the head table fell silent. Lyra's blood turned to ice. Slowly, carefully, she looked up. Theron Vex was watching her with those storm sky eyes, his head tilted slightly. "What's your name?" Every wolf within earshot had gone still. Waiting. Watching. "Lyra, your majesty," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lyra Ashen." Ashen. He said it like he was tasting the word. "You're wolfless." It wasn't a question. Somehow, he could tell just by looking at her, could see the fundamental wrongness that marked her as less. "Yes, your majesty." She waited for the disgust, the dismissal. It's what always came. Instead, Theron Vex just nodded slowly, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he looked away, releasing her from the weight of his attention, and the world started moving again. Lyra finished pouring wine on autopilot and fled back to the kitchens, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the pitcher twice. "What happened?" Martha demanded. "You're white as bone." "Nothing. The king, he just asked my name. And nothing." Lyra set the pitcher down before she could drop it. "He asked, I answered, he moved on." Martha studied her for a long moment, then shook her head. "Finish up here, then get to bed. Tomorrow's going to be worse." She was right. Tomorrow was when the convergence ceremony would take place on the frozen lake. Tomorrow was when the strongest wolves would gather to prove their dominance, to settle old scores, to forge new alliances written in blood and ice. Tomorrow was when everything would change. But Lyra didn't know that yet. All she knew was that the Alpha King had looked at her, really looked at her, and something in her chest had cracked open just a little, letting in a sliver of something she couldn't name. Hope, maybe. Or hunger. Both were dangerous, both would get her killed. She finished her work and retreated to her room, a closet, really, barely large enough for the thin mattress on the floor and the single blanket she'd been issued 3 winters ago. The cold seeped through the stone walls, making her breath fog. But she was used to it. Sleep came slowly, chased by dreams she couldn't quite remember when she woke. The next morning dawned clear and brutal, the kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Lyra woke before dawn. She always did, and went through her usual routine. Splash freezing water on her face, braid her dark hair back tight, pull on the same worn clothes she'd been wearing for years. The bruise on her ribs from yesterday had deepened to purple-black. She prodded it gently, hissed at the spike of pain, then ignored it. The kitchens were already chaos when she arrived. Martha had 3 assistants working on breakfast while she orchestrated lunch preparations for the post-ceremony feast. "You!" Martha barked the moment she saw Lyra. "I need you to run food to the observation posts. The warriors on duty won't leave their positions and they need to eat." Relief flooded through Lyra. Delivery duty meant she'd be away from the ceremony itself, away from the crowds and the danger and the eyes that saw her as prey. "Yes, ma'am." She loaded a cart with bread, dried meat, and hot tea, then began the rounds. The observation posts were scattered around the territory perimeter, high points where warriors kept watch for threats. It was tedious work, hauling the cart up snowy paths, but Lyra didn't mind. The solitude was a gift. She was finishing the 3rd delivery when she heard it, a deep horn blast echoing across the mountains. The ceremony was beginning. From where she stood, high on the eastern ridge, she could just barely see the frozen lake and the valley below. Even from this distance, she could make out the crowd gathering on the ice, hundreds of wolves, maybe more, their forms dark against the white expanse. She should keep working, should finish the deliveries, return to the kitchens, stay invisible like always. Instead, Lyra found herself pushing the cart off the path and into a snowdrift, then making her way higher up the ridge to a rocky outcrop that gave her a clear view of the lake. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just long enough to see what strength looked like when it didn't come from cruelty. The ceremony had already started. She could see wolves moving in formation on the ice, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Challenges were being issued, accepted, fought. This was the heart of pack culture, the eternal contest for dominance, the never-ending struggle to prove worth. Lyra watched, transfixed despite herself. She'd never seen anything like it. The power, the grace, the absolute certainty with which these wolves moved. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She was so focused on the scene below that she almost missed it, the faint creaking sound like old wood settling. Then the screaming started. Lyra's blood froze as she watched the ice, the sacred, supposedly unbreakable ice, shatter beneath a group of young wolves. One moment they were standing proud and strong. The next, they were plunging into black water so cold it killed in minutes. The crowd erupted into chaos. Wolves ran toward the breach, then stopped at the edge, the ice groaning ominously beneath their weight. More cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. No one was moving. No one was helping. The young wolves were screaming, thrashing, their hands scrabbling uselessly at the broken ice. Lyra counted 6 of them, all going under fast. Warriors shouted at each other, arguing about weight distribution and rope and whether the ice would hold. Precious seconds ticked by. A seventh wolf, barely more than a child, slipped beneath the surface and didn't come back up. Something inside Lyra snapped. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, scrambling down the rocky slope, her feet sliding on patches of ice, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged gasps. She didn't have a plan, didn't have any idea what she was doing. She just knew that people were dying and no one was helping them. The crowd didn't notice her at first, too focused on the chaos, too busy arguing about what to do. Lyra hit the edge of the ice at a dead run and didn't slow down. "Stop!" someone shouted. "The ice won't hold." She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Her feet found solid patches by instinct, carrying her across the groaning surface toward the breach. The cold hit her like a fist the moment she got close, spray from the thrashing victims soaking through her thin clothes. A hand broke the surface, fingers grasping desperately at nothing. Lyra dropped to her stomach and lunged forward, her own hand shooting out to grab. She caught a wrist, thin, fragile, the bones like bird wings beneath the skin. The girl on the other end couldn't have been more than 14. Her eyes were wide with terror, her lips already blue. "I've got you," Lyra gasped, though she wasn't sure that was true. The girl was dead weight, the water dragging her down with relentless force. "I've got—" She pulled. Her muscles screamed in protest. She was weak, had always been weak, barely had the strength to haul herself upstairs most days, but somehow she found purchase against the ice and pulled harder. The girl came up inch by agonizing inch, water streaming from her clothes, her whole body convulsing with cold. "Go!" Lyra shoved her toward solid ice, toward the crowd of frozen onlookers. "Move!" The girl crawled away on shaking hands and knees. Lyra turned back to the water. 4 more wolves were visible, struggling against the killing cold. 4 more lives measured in seconds. She dove forward again, grabbed another hand, pulled another body from the depths, then another. Her muscles burned. Her lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. The cold was eating through her clothes, her skin sinking into her bones. Didn't matter. Keep moving, keep pulling. 3 saved, 2 more still in the water. The ice groaned beneath her, new cracks spreading like veins. Someone in the crowd was yelling at her to get back, to stop, but the words were just noise. All that mattered was the hand she could see reaching up from the black water, the flash of terrified eyes. She grabbed, pulled, heaved with everything she had left. The wolf came up coughing, vomiting water, alive. One more. Just one more. Lyra scanned the surface desperately. Where was the 6th? She'd seen 6 go under, had counted them. There. Not a hand. Not a face. Just a shadow beneath the ice, already sinking deep. And Lyra knew with absolute certainty, who it was. The Alpha King had been standing closest to the breach when it opened. Of course he'd gone in. Of course he'd tried to save the others first. "No!" someone was screaming. "Don't! The ice won't— You can't!" Lyra didn't remember making the decision. One moment she was on the surface, the next she was plunging through the broken ice into water so cold it stopped her heart. The shock was absolute, total. Every nerve in her body screamed at once, her lungs seizing, her muscles locking up. This was death. This was what dying felt like. She forced her eyes open anyway. The underwater world was dark, murky, lit only by the pale glow filtering through the ice above. She could see the shadow sinking below her, deeper, always deeper, pulled down by heavy clothes and heavier armor. Her legs kicked weakly. She wasn't a strong swimmer, had never had the chance to learn, but she forced her body to move, diving deeper into the killing cold. Her lungs burned. Her vision was starting to gray at the edges. She stretched out her hand and caught fabric. She'd found him. Found the Alpha King in the drowning dark. Now she just had to get them both back to the surface before the cold claimed them. Lyra pulled him toward her, wrapping her arms around his chest from behind. He was massive, easily twice her weight, and completely limp. Unconscious or dead, she couldn't tell. She kicked for the surface, her legs barely responding, her strength fading with every heartbeat. Not enough. She wasn't strong enough, would never be strong enough. The gray at the edges of her vision was spreading, turning to black. Her lungs were screaming for air. Her arms were going numb. This was how she died then, drowned in ice water trying to save a king who'd probably never even remember her name. At least she'd tried. At least heat exploded through her veins. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a searing warmth that started in her chest and spread through her entire body like wildfire. Her muscles unlocked. Her vision cleared. Her legs kicked with sudden, impossible strength. She broke the surface with a gasp that might have been a scream, dragging the Alpha King up with her. Hands grabbed them immediately. Warriors who'd finally found the courage to venture onto the unstable ice. They pulled Lyra and Theron onto solid ground, someone throwing blankets over them, voices shouting for the healer. Lyra collapsed onto frozen ground, her entire body shaking violently. The strange heat was fading now, leaving behind a cold so profound she thought her bones might shatter. She's going into shock. Get her warm, now. The king, how is the king? He's breathing. She got him out in time. He's breathing. The voices blurred together. The world tilted sideways. The last thing Lyra saw before darkness claimed her was the crowd of wolves staring down at her. Hundreds of them, all watching, all seeing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. Then the world went black, and she knew nothing at all. Lyra woke to voices she didn't recognize and pain she knew intimately. Everything hurt. Her lungs felt scraped raw from the inside. Her muscles ached like she'd been beaten with clubs. The cold had burrowed so deep into her bones that she thought she'd never be warm again, despite the mountain of blankets someone had piled on top of her. She kept her eyes closed, listening. Unprecedented. In all my years, I've never seen ice break like that. The lake was blessed, consecrated. It shouldn't have been possible. Well, it happened. 6 wolves went under, 7, counting the king. And that girl pulled them all out. A pause. Who is she? Nobody. A servant? Wolfless? The word landed like a stone in still water. Silence rippled outward. That's impossible, someone said finally. A wolfless girl doesn't have the strength to... I saw it myself. We all did. She dove in 5 times, 6 if you count going after the king. Hauled them out one by one like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Look at her. She's half dead. Lyra cracked one eye open. She was in a room she didn't recognize. Large, warm, with actual glass windows instead of the shuttered slits she was used to. A fireplace crackled against one wall. The bed beneath her was soft enough to drown in. This wasn't the servants' quarters. This wasn't anywhere she was supposed to be. 3 wolves stood near the door, their backs to her, speaking in low voices. She recognized one, Thaddeus, the pack healer, an older wolf with gray threading through his dark hair. The other 2 were strangers, probably guests from the convergence. Is she awake? The new voice came from somewhere to Lyra's left. She turned her head, slowly, because even that small movement made her ribs scream, and found another figure sitting in a chair beside the bed. Martha. The cook's face was drawn, exhausted, but when she saw Lyra's eyes open, something like relief flickered across her features. There you are, Martha said quietly. Thought we'd lost you for a while there. The king... Lyra's voice came out as a rasp, her throat raw. Is he... alive? Thanks to you. Martha leaned forward, pressing a cup of something warm into Lyra's hands. Drink. Slowly. The liquid was bitter, medicinal, but Lyra didn't care. She drained half the cup before Martha pulled it away. Easy. Your body's been through trauma. You need to take it slow. At the door, the 3 wolves had noticed she was awake. Thaddeus crossed to the bed, his healer's eyes already assessing, cataloging damage. Lie still, he ordered, though not unkindly. I need to check your lungs. He pressed cold hands against her chest, listening, frowning. After a moment, he sat back. You're lucky to be alive. Another minute in that water and you'd have drowned. Your core temperature was so low when they pulled you out that I thought... He stopped himself. Well, you survived. That's what matters. The others? Lyra asked. The young wolves who fell in first. All alive, all recovering. Because of you. The two strangers were staring at her now with expressions she couldn't read. Not quite gratitude. Not quite suspicion. Something in between. How did you do it? One of them asked. A female wolf, tall and lean, with sharp features. You're what? 100 pounds? Maybe less? Those warriors weighed twice what you do. The physics alone. I don't know, Lyra said honestly. I just pulled. You just pulled, the woman repeated like she was testing the words for lies. And the king? You dove down 15 feet in freezing water and brought him back up. You just pulled. Yes. It sounded insane even to Lyra's ears, but it was the truth. She didn't know how she'd done it, didn't know where the strength had come from. All she knew was that people were dying and she'd been the only one close enough to help. The woman's eyes narrowed. What pack are you from originally? She's Frostfang, Thaddeus cut in before Lyra could answer. Born and raised here. Wolfless, though. The second stranger spoke up now, a male wolf with scars crossing his face like a map of old battles. How does a wolfless girl survive 21 winters in a pack like this? Because I learned to be invisible, Lyra thought. Because I learned to endure. But before she could figure out how to answer, the door swung open and the room's entire atmosphere changed. Alpha Garrick Frostfang filled the doorway, his presence sucking the air from the room. He was a massive wolf, built like a landslide, with eyes the color of dirty ice. Those eyes swept over the gathered wolves before landing on Lyra. She fought the urge to make herself smaller. It didn't work anyway. He'd already seen her. Out, Garrick said flatly. All of you. The two strangers left immediately. Thaddeus hesitated, glancing at Lyra, but ultimately followed. Only Martha remained, her jaw set stubbornly. She needs rest, the cook said. Whatever you have to say. I said out. Martha's hands clenched into fists, but she stood and moved toward the door. As she passed Lyra, she squeezed her shoulder once, a brief touch that somehow meant everything, then disappeared into the hallway. The door closed with a soft click. Garrick crossed to the bed, each step deliberate. He didn't sit, just stood there, looking down at Lyra like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You saved the Alpha King's life, he said finally. Yes, Alpha. Why? The question caught her off guard. He was drowning. So were 6 others. You could have stopped after pulling them out. Instead, you went back in. Why? Because he's a person, Lyra wanted to say. Because I couldn't just let him die. But those answers felt too simple, too naive for the wolf standing over her. I didn't think about it, she said instead. I just acted. You didn't think. Garrick's laugh was cold and sharp. That's the first honest thing you've said. You didn't think. Because if you had thought, you would have realized what you've done. Ice slid down Lyra's spine. I don't understand. You made yourself visible. He leaned down, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. For 21 years, you've been nothing. A mistake. A ghost that we tolerated because killing you outright would have been more trouble than you were worth. But now? Now every alpha who witnessed what happened today knows your name, knows your face, knows that the worthless, wolfless servant is somehow strong enough to pull 7 wolves from freezing water. I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what they saw. Garrick straightened, his expression hardening. The Alpha King has asked to speak with you. When you're recovered, you will answer his questions truthfully, and you will not embarrass this pack. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha. Good. He turned toward the door, then paused. And Lyra? Don't mistake what happened today for some kind of redemption. You're still what you've always been. This changes nothing. He left without another word. Lyra stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. She should have felt relieved. Garrick hadn't punished her, hadn't hurt her. But his words echoed in her head, sinking in like poison. You made yourself visible. She'd broken the first rule of survival, and now she'd have to face the consequences. They kept her in the recovery room for 2 days. Thaddeus came and went, checking her vitals, forcing medicine down her throat. Martha smuggled in real food, actual meals, not the scraps Lyra usually survived on. Other servants whispered outside the door, their voices carrying fragments of gossip. Heard she dove in 6 times. Impossible. No way a wolfless. Saw it myself, I'm telling you. King wants to meet her. Garrick's furious. Lyra tried not to listen, tried to focus on healing, on getting her strength back. But the voices seeped in anyway, planting seeds of dread that grew roots in her chest. On the morning of the 3rd day, Thaddeus declared her fit to walk. Your lungs are clear, he said, packing away his supplies. The bruising will fade. You're young. You heal fast. Not fast enough, Lyra thought, but she nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job. He paused at the door. Whatever happens next, be careful. You've drawn attention from wolves who don't forgive easily. Then he was gone, and Lyra was alone with her thoughts. She didn't have long to dwell. Less than an hour later, a knock sounded at the door. Come in, Lyra called, expecting Martha or maybe another servant. Instead, a warrior entered. Not just any warrior, one of the elite guard, marked by the silver cord woven through his armor. His face was professionally blank. Lyra Ashen, the Alpha King requests your presence. Her stomach dropped. Now? Now. She climbed out of bed on shaking legs, acutely aware of how she must look. Her clothes, the same thin, worn things she'd been wearing when they pulled her from the lake, were clean but still patched and faded. Her hair was a mess. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a servant pretending to be something more. The warrior led her through hallways she'd never seen before, deep into the guest wing where the Convergence Alphas were housed. Other wolves stopped and stared as they passed. Some whispered, some just watched with predatory interest. Lyra kept her eyes forward and tried not to trip over her own feet. They stopped at a door guarded by 2 more warriors. The one escorting Lyra nodded to them, and they stepped aside. He's expecting you, her escort said, then left her standing there alone. Lyra took a breath that did nothing to steady her nerves, then knocked. Enter. The voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. The same voice that had asked her name at the feast. She pushed open the door and stepped into a room that made her recovery quarters look like a closet. This was a suite. Multiple rooms connected by archways, everything rich and warm and expensive. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. Windows overlooked the mountains. And standing by those windows, backlit by winter sun, was the Alpha King. Theron Vex looked different than he had at the feast. Less formal, maybe. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a loose shirt, and his hair was still damp, like he'd recently bathed. But the power radiating from him was the same. It filled the room like a physical presence. He turned when she entered, those storm sky eyes finding her immediately. Lyra Ashen, he said, not a question. Your Majesty. She dropped into an awkward bow, not quite sure of the protocol. Nobody had ever taught her how to address a king. Sit. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Please, please, like she had a choice, like they were equals. Lyra perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap. Theron took the chair across from her, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. You saved my life, he said after a moment. I was just... Don't. His voice was gentle but firm. Don't diminish what you did. 6 other wolves went into that water before me. You pulled them all out. Then you came back for me. You dove into 15 feet of freezing water and dragged me back to the surface when you should have drowned yourself. That deserves acknowledgement. Lyra didn't know what to say to that. Thank you felt wrong. You're welcome felt worse. I did what anyone would have done, she managed finally. No. Theron leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. That's the thing, Lyra. No one else did it. There were hundreds of wolves on that ice. Warriors, alphas, the strongest fighters in the territories. And when the ice broke, they froze. They argued about protocol and weight distribution while people drowned. But you? You acted. I didn't think... I know. Your alpha told me. Something flickered across Theron's face. Amusement, maybe, or anger. Hard to tell. He seems to think that's a flaw. Isn't it? Not always. Theron sat back, still watching her with those unnerving eyes. Tell me about yourself. Your family. Your history with this pack. Lyra's throat tightened. There's not much to tell, Your Majesty. My parents died when I was young. I've been a servant here ever since. And you never shifted? No. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Wolves shifted for the first time during puberty, usually between 12 and 16 years old. It was a fundamental part of their nature, as inevitable as breathing, except when it wasn't. I don't know, Lyra said quietly. The pack healer thinks there's something wrong with me, some defect that prevents the change. And the pack treats you accordingly. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. The bruises on your ribs, the scars on your hands, the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly. Theron's voice was conversational, but his eyes had gone cold. Those aren't from clumsiness. Lyra's hands twisted in her lap. It's not, they don't lie to me. Not angry, just tired. I've seen enough abuse to recognize it. Your alpha keeps you as a servant because you're useful, but the pack treats you like prey because you can't fight back. Am I wrong? She wanted to deny it, wanted to defend the wolves who'd raised her, who'd given her shelter even if they'd also given her scars. But sitting here in front of the Alpha King, under the weight of eyes that saw too much, she couldn't make the words come. No, she whispered. You're not wrong. Theron nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he already knew. And yet when those same wolves were dying, you saved them anyway. They're still pack. They're still pack, he repeated, tasting the words. Then he stood, crossing to a table near the window where papers were spread out. I've been making inquiries. About you. About your parents. Lyra's head snapped up. My parents? Marcus and Sarah Ashen. Both died 20 years ago in what was officially recorded as a hunting accident. He picked up one of the papers. But I've spoken to wolves who were there, who remember. They say your parents were strong, respected warriors, and then one day they went out on a routine patrol and never came back. Their bodies were found 3 days later, barely recognizable. I didn't know. And she hadn't. No one talked about her parents. It was like they'd been erased from pack history. There's more. Theron set the paper down. Your mother was pregnant when she died, 8 months along. The healers managed to save the baby, but barely. That baby was you, Lyra. You were cut from your mother's womb and immediately labeled as cursed, a child of death, a mistake. The room spun. Lyra gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the urge to vomit. I don't understand, she managed. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth, and because something about your parents' deaths doesn't add up. He turned back to her, his expression grave. I think they were murdered, and I think whoever killed them did something to you in the womb, something that suppressed your wolf. That's impossible, is it? Then explain how a wolfless girl with no combat training pulled 7 full-grown wolves from freezing water. Explain where that strength came from. Lyra opened her mouth, closed it. She didn't have an answer. There's power in you, Theron said quietly. I felt it when you pulled me from the lake. Something ancient, something that's been locked away. He moved closer, crouching so they were eye level. I want to help you find it, but first I need you to answer one question honestly. Can you do that? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. His eyes searched hers. When you were in the water, diving for me, did you feel anything strange? Anything that wasn't just fear or cold? The memory came back in a rush. The black water, the failing strength, the certainty of death, and then the heat, that impossible burning heat that had flooded her veins. Yes, she whispered. I felt something. Like fire. It came from nowhere, and it gave me strength when I had none left. Theron's expression shifted, not quite satisfaction, but close. That's what I thought. Lyra, I think someone poisoned you, not recently, years ago, maybe your whole life. Something to suppress your wolf, to keep you weak. But when you were facing death, your body broke through the suppression, just for a moment, just long enough. But why? The question came out as a plea. Why would anyone do that to a child? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. He stood, offering her his hand. I want you to come back with me, to my territory. I have healers there who specialize in curses and suppression. They can examine you, figure out what was done, and how to undo it. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand like it was a trap. Alpha Garrick would never allow it. Alpha Garrick doesn't have a choice. You saved my life. By ancient law, that creates a debt that must be repaid. I'm invoking that debt now, and claiming you as part of my household. You're claiming me. The words felt strange in her mouth. Like property. Like protection. His hand didn't waver. You stay here, and they'll destroy you. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually someone will decide that you're too much of a risk, too much of an anomaly, and you'll disappear, just like your parents did. He was right. She knew he was right. Garrick's words echoed in her memory. You made yourself visible, but leaving meant abandoning everything she'd ever known. The pack that hated her, yes, but also Martha, also the handful of small kindnesses that had kept her alive this long. I need time, she said, to think. You have until tomorrow morning. We leave at dawn. Theron lowered his hand. I won't force you, Lyra, but understand, this is probably the only chance you'll get to find out who you really are. She stood on shaking legs. Can I ask you something, Your Majesty? Of course. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond gratitude. Why go to this trouble? For the first time since she'd entered the room, Theron smiled. It was small, sad, and entirely genuine. Because I know what it's like to be alone in a pack that sees you as a threat, he said quietly. And because when I was drowning in that dark water, convinced I was going to die, the last thing I saw was you. This small, broken girl diving down through the cold to save me when everyone else had given up. You didn't do it for glory, didn't do it for reward. You did it because it was right. That kind of courage is rare, Lyra, and it deserves better than what this pack has given you. Something in Lyra's chest cracked open. Not quite hope, not quite trust, but something close. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I ask. The warrior escorted her back to her room in silence. Lyra's mind was spinning, thoughts crashing into each other like debris in a flood. Murdered parents, suppressed power, a king offering escape. It sounded like a fairy tale, the kind of story that ended with the poor servant becoming a princess. But Lyra had never believed in fairy tales. She believed in survival, in endurance, in the small, hard truths that kept you alive one more day. She was still wrestling with her thoughts when she reached her room and found someone waiting inside. Not Martha, not a guard. Magnus Frostfang, Alpha Heir, Garrick's golden son. He was sitting on her bed, her thin, pathetic mattress that barely qualified as furniture, with his elbows on his knees and an expression on his face that sent warning bells screaming through Lyra's head. We need to talk, Magnus said. Lyra's hand found the door frame, gripping it for support. About what? About the choice you're going to make tomorrow. He stood, and even in the cramped space of her closet room, he seemed to take up all the air. My father told me about the king's offer, about him wanting to take you to his territory. That's between me and the king. No. Magnus moved closer. It's between you and this pack. You were born here, Lyra. You've lived here your whole life. You belong to Frostfang. I don't belong to anyone. His hand shot out faster than she could dodge and caught her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to prove he could. You think the king cares about you? Magnus's voice was soft, almost gentle. That scared her more than shouting would have. You think he's offering you this out of kindness? He's using you. Whatever power you showed on that ice, he wants it, wants to study it, control it, turn you into a weapon. And what does your pack want? Lyra tried to pull her wrist free. His grip tightened. To keep beating me? Keep starving me? Keep treating me like I'm less than nothing? We keep you safe. His other hand came up, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her skin crawl. Do you know what wolves do to the weak in other territories? They don't just mock them, Lyra. They kill them. The only reason you're alive is because my father has allowed it. How generous. I'm serious. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she fought not to recoil. You leave with the king tomorrow, and you'll be dead within a month. Maybe less. But if you stay, if you prove your loyalty to this pack, things could change. I could make them change. There was something in his eyes that turned Lyra's stomach. Not quite desire, not quite possession, something worse. "Let go of me," she said quietly. "Lyra, let go." For a moment she thought he wouldn't, thought he'd cross that final line that couldn't be uncrossed. But then his hands dropped and he stepped back, his expression shifting to something harder. "You have until dawn to decide," he said. "Choose wisely." He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a threat. Lyra sank to the floor, her back against the wall, her whole body shaking. Not from cold this time. From rage. From fear. From the horrible understanding of what Magnus had really been saying. "Stay, and maybe we'll stop hurting you. Maybe we'll give you scraps of dignity. Maybe you'll survive. Or leave, and risk everything on the word of a king you barely knew." It shouldn't have been a hard choice, but sitting there in the dark, in the room that had been her prison for 21 years, Lyra realized it was the hardest choice she'd ever faced. She pulled her knees to her chest and tried to breathe through the panic. Somewhere in the pack house, wolves were preparing for tomorrow's departure. The Convergence guests would leave at dawn, returning to their territories, their politics, their endless games of dominance, and Lyra would have to decide: stay in hell or follow a stranger into the unknown. She didn't sleep that night, just sat in the dark, watching the hours tick by, waiting for an answer that refused to come. When the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, she finally knew what she had to do. She'd go. That was the decision, the only decision that made sense. Lyra packed in the pre-dawn darkness. Not that there was much to pack. A spare shirt with holes in the elbows, the blanket from her bed, a wooden comb missing half its teeth that had belonged to her mother, or so Martha had told her once. Everything she owned fit in a cloth sack small enough to carry in one hand. 21 years of life, reduced to almost nothing. She was tying the sack closed when footsteps sounded in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful, too many of them. The door slammed open hard enough to crack against the wall. Kale stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 other warriors. His face was twisted with something ugly. Anger, maybe, or satisfaction at finally having an excuse. "Going somewhere? Wolfless?" Lyra's fingers tightened on the sack. "The Alpha King claimed me. I'm leaving with his—" "You're not going anywhere." Kale stepped into the room, forcing her back against the wall. The space was so small that his bulk filled it completely. "Alpha Garrick's orders. You're confined to quarters until further notice." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "He can't do that. The king invoked ancient law. The king can invoke whatever he wants. You're still Frostfang property until your Alpha says otherwise." Kale's smile was all teeth, and he doesn't say otherwise. One of the other warriors, a female with a scar bisecting her lip, grabbed the sack from Lyra's hands and dumped its contents on the floor. The wooden comb cracked when it hit stone. "Please," Lyra said, hating the weakness in her voice. "That was my mother's—" The female warrior ground her heel into the comb, splintering it completely. "Oops!" Rage flooded through Lyra, hot and sudden. Before she could think better of it, she lunged for the warrior, not to fight, just to push her away from the broken pieces of the only thing she had left of her mother. Kale's fist caught her in the stomach. The air exploded from her lungs. She doubled over, gasping, and his knee came up to meet her face. Pain burst across her cheekbone. The floor rushed up to slam into her shoulder. "That's for making us look weak in front of the other packs," Kyle said conversationally, punctuating his words with a kick to her ribs. "Did you really think we'd just let you leave? Let you run to the king and tell him all our secrets?" "I don't—" Another kick cut off her words. "I don't know any—" "Shut up." He crouched beside her, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back. "You embarrassed this pack, made us look soft, made warriors look like cowards because they didn't jump in after some drowning wolves." His grip tightened, pain screaming across her scalp. "The Alpha King leaves at dawn. You don't. And if you try to leave this room before he's gone, I'll break both your legs. Understand?" Lyra tried to nod, but his grip on her hair made it impossible. "I said, do you understand?" "Yes." The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "Good." He shoved her face into the floor and stood. "Someone will bring you food eventually." "Maybe." They left, slamming the door behind them. Lyra heard something heavy scrape across the floor outside. Furniture being moved to block the exit. then footsteps fading, then nothing. She lay there for a long moment, tasting blood, her body a chorus of pain. Everything hurt. Her face, her ribs, her head where Kael had pulled her hair. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing weight of helplessness settling over her chest. They were going to keep her here, lock her away until the king left, until the opportunity passed. Then what? More years of this? More beatings? More starvation? More existing as less than nothing? Or worse? Magnus's words echoed in her memory. If you prove your loyalty to this pack, things could change. She didn't want to know what proving loyalty would cost. Lyra pushed herself up slowly, biting back a whimper as her ribs protested. The room was still dark. Dawn was maybe an hour away. The king would be preparing to leave, loading supplies, saddling horses, saying formal goodbyes to Alpha Garrick. He'd probably ask about her. Garrick would make excuses, say she'd changed her mind or gotten cold feet, or realized where she truly belonged. And Theron would leave because what else could he do? Start a war over one wolfless servant? The thought of it, of being trapped here forever, of never knowing what she could have been, made something inside Lyra's chest crack wide open. No. She'd survived 21 years in this pack, survived beatings and starvation and cruelty that should have killed her a dozen times over. She'd pulled 7 wolves from freezing water when everyone else stood frozen. She'd felt power burning through her veins, impossible and real. She wasn't going to give up now. Lyra crossed to the window, barely more than a slit in the stone wall, and peered out. 3 stories up. No ledges, no handholds, just sheer wall dropping to frozen ground that would shatter every bone in her body if she fell. The door was blocked from outside. The window was a death trap. She was well and truly trapped. Unless. Lyra looked at the window again, really looked at it. The opening was narrow, designed to let in light and air while keeping out enemies. But it was also old. The mortar around the stones was crumbling in places, weakened by decades of freeze-thaw cycles. Maybe she couldn't fit through the window, but maybe she could make the window bigger. She grabbed the broken comb, the pieces of it, and started digging at the mortar. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the mountains, Lyra's fingers were bloody, and 3 stones had been pried loose from around the window frame. The opening was still too small, but it was bigger. Maybe big enough. She could hear activity in the courtyard below, horses being readied, supplies loaded, the king's party preparing to depart. Now or never. Lyra stripped off her shirt, she'd need the mobility, and started working on the 4th stone. The mortar was stubborn here, harder than the others. She dug at it frantically, ignoring the pain in her fingers, the blood making everything slippery. Come on, come on! The stone shifted, not much, just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. She wedged the broken comb into the gap and pried with everything she had. The wood splintered, the stone grated against its neighbors. Then, finally, it came free with a grinding crack that sounded impossibly loud in the small room. The opening was big enough now. Barely, if she squeezed. Lyra pulled her shirt back on and looked down at the drop. 3 stories, maybe 40 feet. The ground below was packed snow over frozen earth. This was insane. Even if she survived the fall, she'd probably break something. And then what? Crawl to the stables? Beg the king to take her while Garrick's warriors closed in? But staying meant giving up, meant accepting that this room, this pack, this half-life was all she'd ever have. She thought of her parents, of their bodies found barely recognizable, of the baby cut from a dead woman's womb and labeled cursed, of the heat that had burned through her veins underwater, giving her impossible strength. Lyra climbed onto the narrow window ledge, her heart trying to punch through her ribs. Then she jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Wind screamed past her ears, the ground rushed up, white and hard and unforgiving. She hit a snowdrift at an angle, the impact driving every bit of air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her left ankle. She tumbled, rolled, came to rest face down in snow that tasted like iron. For several seconds, she couldn't move, couldn't think past the pain. Her ankle was screaming, her ribs felt like they'd been kicked all over again, and something warm was running down her face. Blood, probably, from a cut somewhere. But she was alive, and she wasn't in that room anymore. Lyra forced herself up, testing her weight. Her left ankle buckled immediately, white-hot agony shooting up her leg. Sprained. Maybe broken. Either way, she couldn't run. She could barely walk. The courtyard entrance was 50 yards away. Might as well have been 50 miles. She started hobbling toward it anyway, one agonizing step at a time. Behind her, she heard shouts. Someone had noticed the stones missing from the window, or seen her fall, or both. Didn't matter. She kept moving. The courtyard was organized chaos. The king's wolves loading the last of their supplies. Frostfang warriors standing at attention. Alpha Garrick in the center of it all, making some formal speech about safe travels and continued alliance. Theron stood listening, his face professionally neutral. He looked different in traveling gear, harder somehow, more dangerous. This was the Alpha King in his element, not the quiet wolf who'd sat across from her by the fire. Lyra opened her mouth to call out to him, but no sound came. Her voice had abandoned her, stolen by pain and fear and the sheer impossibility of what she was trying to do. She took another step. Her ankle gave out completely and she crashed to her knees in the snow. That's when Magnus saw her. His eyes went wide, then narrow. He said something to the warrior beside him, too quiet for Lyra to hear, and started moving in her direction. Not running. That would draw too much attention. Just walking with purpose, his hand dropping to the blade at his belt. Lyra tried to stand, failed, tried again. Lyra! The voice cut through the courtyard noise like a knife. Martha was running toward her from the kitchens, her face pale with fear. What are you? How did you? The cook reached her, dropping to her knees beside her. You're bleeding, your ankle. I need to get to the king, Lyra gasped. Please, You need a healer, you stupid girl. You're hurt. I'm leaving. The words came out fierce, final. I can't stay here anymore, Martha. I can't. Something shifted in the older woman's face. Not quite approval, but understanding. Can you stand? I don't know. Then we'll find out. Martha hauled Lyra to her feet with surprising strength, taking most of her weight. Lean on me. Together they started toward the courtyard. Magnus was closer now, maybe 20 yards away. His expression had gone cold and flat, the look of someone about to do something unpleasant but necessary. Stop, he called out. Not shouting, just loud enough to carry. That servant is confined to quarters by Alpha order. Some of the king's wolves turned to look. Garrick's speech faltered. She's injured, Martha shot back. I'm taking her to the healer. She jumped from a third-story window to escape confinement. That's not an injury. That's desertion. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Desertion was one of the worst crimes a pack member could commit. Punishment was severe, often permanent. Garrick's eyes found Lyra across the courtyard, and she saw her death in them. Seize her, the Alpha commanded. 3 warriors started forward immediately. Magnus smiled. And Lyra felt that heat again, that impossible burning warmth spreading through her veins like wildfire. No, not now, not here. But her body didn't care what she wanted. The heat intensified, building in her chest, spreading down her arms. The snow beneath her feet began to steam. Lyra, Martha said quietly, urgently. What's happening? I don't know. One of the approaching warriors, a massive male with hands like sledgehammers, reached for her. His fingers closed around her forearm. Ice exploded from the point of contact. It spread across his arm in seconds, coating his skin in frost so thick it crackled audibly. He screamed and jerked back, but the ice came with him, crawling up past his elbow toward his shoulder. The courtyard went dead silent. Lyra stared at her own hand in horror. Frost patterns swirled across her skin, beautiful and terrible. The air around her had turned so cold that her breath crystallized the moment it left her lips. Impossible, someone whispered. She's wolfless. She's not wolfless. Theron's voice cut through the shock. He'd moved to the edge of the crowd, his eyes locked on Lyra with an intensity that made her want to run. She never was. That's not a wolf, Garrick snarled. I don't know what that is, but she's frostborn, an elderly female interrupted. One of the convergence guests, a seer, Lyra thought, based on the white marks tattooed across her face. Old blood, ancient power. I didn't think any of the bloodline survived. The seer moved closer, studying Lyra like she was a puzzle finally making sense. Your parents weren't killed in a hunting accident, child.
They were executed. The old families saw their power as a threat. They poisoned you in the womb to suppress what you'd inherited. She turned to Garrick, her expression hard. But you knew that, didn't you, Alpha? Or at least suspected. That's why you kept her close, kept her weak.
Because if she ever awakened, she'd be stronger than any wolf in your pack. Garrick's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? The seer's laugh was bitter. Let me guess. You've been putting wolfsbane in her food for years. Just a little. Not enough to kill, but enough to keep her magic dormant. She looked back at Lyra. How long have you been sick, girl? How long have you felt weak and wrong? Forever. For as long as she could remember.
You poisoned me, Lyra said quietly, looking at Garrick. All this time. You knew what I was, and I kept you alive. Garrick's composure cracked, anger bleeding through. The council wanted you dead the moment you were born, said a frostborn child was too dangerous to let live. But I argued for mercy, convinced them that you'd never awaken without proper training, without someone to teach you. So yes, I kept you weak, kept you suppressed.
Because the alternative was watching them cut your throat. How generous, Theron said coldly. You tortured her for 20 years instead. I did what was necessary to protect this pack. From what? A child? Theron moved closer to Lyra, positioning himself between her and Garrick's warriors. She's not your enemy. She never was. She's a walking catastrophe waiting to happen. Garrick gestured at the warrior still trying to shake ice from his arm. Look at what she just did. Without training, without control, she's dangerous. Then train her. Theron's voice carried absolute authority now. I'm taking her back to my territory as originally planned. My healers will examine her. My teachers will help her learn control. You have no say in this. She's still Frostfang. She stopped being Frostfang the moment you decided her life was worth less than your paranoia. Theron held out his hand to Lyra. The choice is still yours. Stay here with wolves who've spent 20 years poisoning you, or come with me and find out who you were meant to be. It wasn't really a choice. Not anymore. Lyra took his hand. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Garrick moved, faster than she'd ever seen him move, his hand dropping to the ceremonial blade at his belt. If you leave this pack, he said quietly, you leave as a traitor, and traitors are dealt with accordingly. He was going to kill her. Right here, right now, in front of the Alpha King and all the Convergence witnesses. He'd rather commit murder than let her walk away with the truth. Lyra felt the cold spreading through her veins again, responding to her fear. Ice crept across the ground beneath her feet, spreading in spiral patterns that looked almost alive. Stand down, Garrick. Theron's voice was soft, but it carried a threat that made the air feel heavy. You draw that blade, and this stops being a pack matter. It becomes a territorial dispute, and you really don't want to go to war with me. You're protecting a monster. I'm protecting someone your pack tortured for 2 decades. Theron's hand tightened on Lyra's. Last warning, stand down. For a moment, Garrick looked like he might actually do it. Might actually attack an Alpha King in front of witnesses just to keep his secrets buried. Then Magnus stepped forward, placing himself between his father and Theron. Let her go, the heir said quietly. She's not worth this. Garrick's jaw clenched. His hand remained on his blade for several more heartbeats. Then, slowly, he released it. Get out of my territory, he said to Lyra, and don't ever come back. Theron didn't wait for him to change his mind. He swept Lyra up into his arms, she was too shocked to protest, and carried her toward the waiting horses. His wolves fell into formation around them, creating a protective barrier. Martha pushed through the crowd at the last moment, pressing something into Lyra's hand, a small cloth bundle. Food for the journey, the cook said gruffly. Her eyes were wet. And some herbs for the pain. Martha, don't. Just go. Quickly. One of Theron's warriors helped lift Lyra onto a horse, then mounted behind her to keep her steady. The king swung onto his own mount with fluid grace. Move out, he ordered. The pack began to ride, hooves crunching against snow. Lyra looked back once and saw Garrick still standing in the courtyard, his expression unreadable. Magnus beside him, watching her leave with something that might have been relief. And Martha, alone by the kitchen entrance, raising one hand in farewell. Then they rounded the mountain curve and Frostfang territory disappeared from view. Lyra sagged against the warrior behind her, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind pain and shock, and the slow, terrible understanding of everything she'd just learned. Her parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered. She wasn't wolfless. She'd been poisoned her entire life. And now she was something called Frostborn, whatever that meant, with power she didn't understand and couldn't control. "Easy," the warrior murmured. "You're safe now." But Lyra didn't feel safe. She felt like she was falling, like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet, and she was tumbling through empty air with no idea where she'd land. They rode for hours. The landscape changed from familiar mountains to forests Lyra had never seen, following trails she didn't recognize. Her ankle throbbed with every step the horse took. Her ribs ached. The cut on her face had stopped bleeding, but the whole side of her head felt swollen and tender. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally giving up the fight to stay alert. When she woke fully, the sun was high overhead, and they'd stopped in a clearing to rest the horses. Someone had laid her on a bedroll near a small fire. Her ankle had been wrapped in clean bandages. Theron crouched beside her, offering a water skin. "Drink slowly," he said. "You're dehydrated." The water was cold and perfect. Lyra drained half the skin before forcing herself to stop. "How long was I out?" 3 hours, give or take." He studied her face, his expression concerned. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." A lie, but she'd gotten good at those over the years. "We're about halfway to my territory. We'll stop for the night once we reach the borderway station. Get you proper medical attention there." Lyra nodded, then winced as the movement sent pain shooting through her skull. "The seer. She said I was Frostborn. What does that mean?" Theron was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. The Frostborn were an ancient bloodline. Some say they were the first wolves, blessed by the old gods with power over ice and winter. Others say they were something else entirely, a separate species that interbred with wolves long ago. Either way, they were powerful, feared, and mostly extinct. Mostly? There were purges hundreds of years ago. The wolf packs saw the Frostborn as a threat to their dominance and systematically hunted them down. He paused. "I thought they'd succeeded, that the bloodline had been wiped out completely, but clearly some survived. Your parents, obviously, and you. And they killed my parents for it." "Yes." The confirmation hurt worse than any physical pain. "Why keep me alive? Why not just finish the job?" "I don't know. Maybe Garrick was telling the truth. Maybe he did argue for mercy. Or maybe they thought a suppressed Frostborn was more useful than a dead one." Theron's jaw tightened. "We'll find out. I promise you that. But first we need to get you healthy. Get the poison out of your system, then we can start figuring out what you're capable of." What she was capable of. The words sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. She thought of the ice that had exploded from her hand, coating that warrior's arm in seconds. Thought of the heat that had burned through her underwater, giving her impossible strength. What else could she do? What else was locked inside her, waiting to break free? "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Good. That means you're smart." Theron stood, offering his hand again. "Come on. Let's get some food in you before we ride again." The rest of the journey passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. They crossed into the king's territory as the sun was setting, passing through gates guarded by wolves who bowed as Theron approached. The way station was a fortress carved into the mountainside, all stone and iron, built to withstand siege. Warm light spilled from windows. The smell of cooking meat made Lyra's stomach cramp with hunger. A healer met them in the courtyard, a stern-faced female with gray hair and gentle hands. She took one look at Lyra and immediately started barking orders. "Get her inside. I need hot water, clean bandages, and my medical kit. Now." They carried Lyra to a room with an actual bed, soft, warm, piled with real blankets. The healer examined her with efficient thoroughness, tutting over the bruises, the swollen ankle, the half-healed injuries from years of abuse. "Wolfsbane poisoning," she announced after checking Lyra's eyes and tongue. "Long-term. I can start a purge treatment, but it'll take weeks to fully clear her system, and it's going to hurt." "Do it," Lyra said. The healer's eyebrows rose. You don't want to know what's involved. I don't care what's involved. I want it out of me. Something like approval flickered across the healer's face. All right then. We'll start tonight. The purge treatment was exactly as bad as promised. The healer made Lyra drink something that tasted like death and burned going down. Within minutes, her stomach was cramping violently. She vomited until there was nothing left, then kept vomiting anyway. Through it all, Theron stayed, held her hair back when she was sick, pressed cool cloths to her forehead when fever took hold, didn't flinch when she cursed at him or when she cried from the pain. "Why are you doing this?" she asked at one point, her voice raw from vomiting. "Why do you care?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because when I was 14, my father tried to drown me." Lyra's eyes snapped open. "What?" "I was too powerful, too young. He saw it as a threat to his authority. So one night, he took me out to the lake and held my head underwater until I stopped fighting." Theron's voice was flat, emotionless. "I survived because my wolf finally emerged and I ripped his throat out. But I remember what it felt like, being held down, knowing the person who's supposed to protect you wants you dead." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. That's just how it is sometimes. The strong fear what they can't control." He met her eyes. "I couldn't save myself at 14, but I can help save you now. So that's what I'm going to do." The purge treatment went on for hours. By the time it finally ended, Lyra was wrung out, hollow, too exhausted to even feel the pain in her ankle anymore. She slept and dreamed of ice spreading across dark water, of hands pulling her down, of heat burning through her veins, turning everything to steam and ash. When she woke, pale morning light was streaming through the window. Her mouth tasted like something had died in it, but the crushing nausea was gone. Theron was asleep in a chair beside the bed, his head tilted at an angle that would give him a horrible neckache when he woke. He'd stayed all night, watching over her. Lyra pushed herself up carefully. Her body ached, but it was different from before. Cleaner, somehow, like poison had been leached from her bones, leaving behind something that might eventually heal. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her weight on the injured ankle. Still painful, but bearable. The room they'd given her opened onto a small balcony. Lyra crossed to it, pushing open the door, and stepped out into morning air so cold it made her lungs ache. The view stole her breath. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks white with snow that caught the rising sun and turned it gold. Forests sprawled in the valleys between, dark green against white. And in the distance, she could just make out what looked like a city. Stone buildings climbing up the mountainside, smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys. This was the king's territory. And somehow, impossibly, it was hers now too. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned. Theron had woken, was standing in the doorway watching her. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "You'll get used to it." He moved to stand beside her, looking out over his lands. "We'll reach the capital by nightfall. Once we're there, the real work begins. Training, education, learning to control what's inside you before it controls you. And if I can't learn, you will." He said it with absolute certainty. "You survived 2 decades of systematic abuse and still dove into freezing water to save people who tormented you. That takes strength most wolves never find. Learning to harness your power will be easier than what you've already endured." Lyra wasn't sure she believed that. But standing here, looking out over a world that was suddenly full of possibility instead of pain, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could try. Behind them, someone knocked on the door. One of Theron's warriors, coming to tell them the horses were ready. It was time to keep moving, time to leave behind the girl she'd been and start becoming whatever she was meant to be. Lyra took one last look at the mountains, then turned and followed the king back inside. Her ankle throbbed with each step. Her body still ached from the purge treatment. She had no idea what waited for her in the capital or whether she'd survive what came next. But for the first time in 21 years, she was choosing her own path. And that made all the difference. The capital was nothing like Lyra had imagined. She'd expected something cold and formal, a mirror of Frostfang's brutal efficiency. Instead, iron peaks spread across the mountainside like something alive, stone buildings with carved facades climbing toward a massive fortress that crowned the summit. Markets bustled despite the cold. Children played in the streets. Wolves moved with purpose, but without the constant undercurrent of violence she was used to. It looked like a place where people actually lived, instead of just survived. "It's different," she said quietly, as their horses picked their way through the main thoroughfare. People stopped to bow as Theron passed, their faces showing respect rather than fear. "Different how?" he asked. "Less angry." His mouth quirked. "That's one way to put it. We have our problems like any pack, but we don't solve everything with teeth and claws." He nodded toward a group of young wolves sparring in a training yard. "Strength matters here, but so does intelligence, innovation, the ability to think beyond the next challenge." They passed through 3 sets of gates before reaching the fortress itself. Guards saluted, not with the rigid terror she'd seen in Frostfang, but with genuine acknowledgement. Inside, the halls were wide and well lit, warmed by fires and massive hearths. Theron led her to a suite of rooms that made her recovery quarters at the way station look like a closet. "These are yours," he said simply, "for as long as you need them." Lyra stood in the center of the main room, slowly turning. A real bed with thick blankets, windows with actual glass, furniture that looked like it had been made by someone who cared about their craft. A door that led to what appeared to be a private bathing room. "This is too much," she managed. "It's the standard guest suite. You should see what we give visiting dignitaries." He crossed to a side table and poured water from a pitcher. "Rest today. Let your body recover from the journey. Tomorrow, training begins." "What kind of training?" "The kind that keeps you from accidentally freezing someone solid the next time you get scared." He handed her the cup. "I've sent for Elena. She's the best teacher we have for magical combat. If anyone can help you control what you are, it's her." Magical combat. The words felt surreal. A week ago, Lyra had been scrubbing blood from training hall floors. Now she was apparently about to learn how to fight with ice magic she barely understood. "What if I can't do it?" The fear leaked through despite her best efforts. "What if I'm too broken from the poisoning?" "You're not broken." Theron's voice was firm. "Damaged, yes. Suppressed, but not broken. We're going to prove that, starting tomorrow." He left her alone after that. Lyra explored the suite like it might disappear if she looked away too long. The bathing room had running water, actual hot water that came from taps in the wall. She filled the large basin and sank into it, hissing as the heat found every bruise and scrape. The water turned pink with blood from cuts she hadn't even realized she had. She soaked until the water went cold, then wrapped herself in a robe softer than anything she'd ever touched and collapsed into the bed. Sleep took her instantly, dragging her down into darkness where she didn't dream at all. A knock woke her. Pale morning light streamed through the windows. Lyra had slept through the entire day and night. "Enter," she called, her voice rough. A young female wolf came in carrying a tray loaded with food. Real food. Bread still warm from the oven, cheese, fruit, strips of cooked meat. The smell made Lyra's stomach clench with hunger. "His Majesty thought you might be hungry," the girl said, setting the tray on a small table. "I'm Kara. I've been assigned to help you settle in. If you need anything, clothes, supplies, directions, just ask." Lyra stared at her. "You're a servant?" "I'm an attendant. There's a difference." Kara smiled. "We're not property here. We're pack members who chose service as our contribution. I get paid, get days off, get treated like a person." She gestured to the tray. "Eat. You look half-starved." She wasn't wrong. Lyra devoured the food with an urgency that probably looked desperate, but she couldn't bring herself to care. When was the last time she'd eaten a full meal? Days ago? Weeks? "Better?" Kara asked when the tray was empty. "Much, thank you." "Good, because Elena's waiting in the training courtyard, and from what I hear, she doesn't like to be kept waiting." 20 minutes later, Lyra found herself standing in a wide courtyard surrounded by high stone walls. The ground was packed earth covered with a light dusting of snow. Training dummies lined one wall. Weapons racks filled another, and in the center stood a wolf who looked like she could kill you 6 different ways without breaking a sweat. Elena was tall, lean, with silver white hair braided down her back and scars crossing both forearms like badges of honor. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter sky,
And when they landed on Lyra, they saw everything. "So you're the Frostborn," she said without preamble. "Have to admit, you don't look like much." "I'm not," Lyra said honestly. "Good. Honesty's more useful than false confidence." Elena circled her slowly, assessing. "The king says you manifested ice magic twice.
Once underwater, once when threatened, both times instinctive, uncontrolled. That sound right?" "Yes. And you were poisoned with wolfsbane for 2 decades, which suppressed your abilities." Elena stopped in front of her. "Which means you're essentially starting from zero. No training, no control, no understanding of what you can do. Correct?"
"Correct."
"Perfect. I love a challenge." Elena's smile was sharp. "Let's see what you're working with. Try to make ice. Right now, however you think it works."
Lyra blinked. "I don't know how." "Then figure it out. You did it twice before without knowing how. Do it again." "I was dying both times. I can't just—" "Can't or won't." Elena's voice cracked like a whip. "You pulled 7 wolves from freezing water. You escaped a locked room and survived a 3-story fall. You crossed half a territory with a broken ankle because you refused to give up. Don't stand here and tell me you can't try." The words hit like a slap. Lyra felt her temper flare, the same rage that had made her lunge at the warrior who'd destroyed her mother's comb. She focused on that anger, on the heat it generated in her chest, and pushed. Nothing happened. "Try harder," Elena said. "I am trying." "No, you're thinking. Stop thinking. Feel." Elena moved closer. "Close your eyes. Remember what it felt like underwater. The cold, the fear, the moment when your power surged. What did that feel like?" Lyra closed her eyes, reaching back into memory. The black water, the failing strength, the certainty of death, and then the heat. Not warm, burning, like fire in her veins, but somehow cold at the same time. A contradiction that made no sense but felt absolutely right. She grabbed for that feeling, pulling it up from whatever place inside her it had come from. Her hands started to tingle. The air around her grew noticeably colder. "Good," Elena said quietly. "Keep going. Don't force it. Let it flow." The tingling intensified. Frost began to form on Lyra's fingertips, spreading across her skin in delicate patterns. "Now release it. Project it outward." Lyra opened her eyes and thrust her hands forward. Ice exploded from her palms, not in a controlled stream, but in a chaotic burst that sent shards flying in every direction. Elena dodged easily. The shards embedded themselves in the courtyard wall, in training dummies, in the packed earth. Then the power cut off like a severed rope, and Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping. "Not bad for a first try," Elena said, helping her up. "Terrible control, no finesse, but the raw power is there. We can work with that." "I feel like I ran 5 miles. You just channeled magic through a body that's been suppressed for 20 years. Of course you're exhausted." Elena guided her to a bench against the wall. "We'll start small. Build your stamina. Teach you control before we work on power. Can you train every day?" "Yes." "Even when it hurts? Even when you want to quit?" Lyra thought of 20 years spent scrubbing floors and swallowing pain. "Pain doesn't scare me." "It should. The kind of training you need will break you down before it builds you back up." Elena's expression softened slightly. "But I think you can handle it. Question is, do you want to?" "I want to never be helpless again," Lyra said. "I want to be strong enough that no one can hurt me just because they feel like it. So yes, I want to train." "Then we start tomorrow at dawn. Wear comfortable clothes and eat well tonight. You're going to need your strength." The training that followed was brutal. Elena worked her for hours every day, pushing her to manifest ice in increasingly controlled ways. Small bursts, specific shapes, directed streams. It was exhausting, frustrating work. More often than not, Lyra's power either refused to appear or exploded out in wild, uncontrolled bursts. "Again," Elena would say, patient and relentless. "Focus, control. Again." Lyra's body ached constantly, but it was different from the pain she'd known in Frostfang. This was the pain of muscles being used, of a body growing stronger. She could feel the changes, her stamina increasing, her control improving incrementally.
2 weeks into training, she managed to create a sphere of ice in her palm and hold it there for a full minute before it shattered. Progress, Elena declared. Slow, but real. The physical training was only part of it. Theron had also assigned her tutors, wolves who taught her to read beyond basic letters, who explained pack politics and territorial law, who filled in the massive gaps in her education. She learned that Frostborn weren't just ice wielders. They'd been diplomats, advisors, peacekeepers. Their power had made them valuable, but it was their wisdom that had made them indispensable, until fear turned admiration into hatred. She learned about the purges, how entire families had been slaughtered, how the survivors had gone into hiding, suppressing their gifts, trying to pass as ordinary wolves, how her parents had probably died trying to protect the secret of what she was. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy, undeniable. 1 month after arriving in Iron Peak, Lyra was in the courtyard working through her forms when a commotion erupted near the fortress gates. Raised voices, the clatter of hooves. Elena's hand dropped to her blade. Stay here. But Lyra was already moving toward the noise, curiosity overriding caution. A group of riders had arrived, wolves in travel-stained clothes bearing Frostfang colors. At their head rode Magnus. Lyra's blood turned cold. What was he doing here? Theron appeared from inside the fortress, his expression carefully neutral. Heir Magnus, this is unexpected. Your Majesty. Magnus dismounted, his movements stiff. I come bearing a formal challenge. The courtyard went silent. Challenges were serious business, binding under ancient law, witnessed by both packs. A challenge to whom? Theron asked quietly. Not to you. Magnus's eyes found Lyra across the courtyard. To her. Lyra's stomach dropped. What? Lyra Ashen. Magnus' voice carried across the space. You left Frostfang under false pretenses, abandoning your pack and your duty. Under our law, that makes you a deserter. I challenge you for the right to drag you back to face justice. She's not Frostfang anymore, Theron said, his voice gone hard. She's under my protection. Which means she falls under Northern Territory law, and that law allows me to issue this challenge. Magnus pulled out a scroll, holding it up. Witnessed and sealed by 3 neutral alphas. Everything is legal, Your Majesty. She can accept and fight or refuse and be declared a coward in front of all the packs. It was a trap, a clever one. If Lyra fought and lost, Magnus could claim her. If she refused, she'd be labeled a coward, which would undermine everything Theron was trying to build for her. Either way, Frostfang won. When? Lyra heard herself ask. Magnus smiled. Tomorrow at noon, in the main arena. The challenge will be witnessed by representatives from all major packs. She's not ready, Elena said sharply. She's barely been training for a month. Then she shouldn't have run. Magnus turned back to his horse. Tomorrow at noon, Lyra. Don't be late. He rode out with his escort, leaving chaos in his wake. Theron crossed to Lyra immediately. You don't have to accept this. There are other ways. No. She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He's right. If I refuse, I look weak, and weakness is death in pack culture. She met his eyes. I'll fight. You'll die, Elena said bluntly. Magnus is a trained warrior. You've had 1 month of barely controlled magic practice. This isn't a fair fight. It was never going to be fair. Lyra's hands clenched into fists. But I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding. If he wants me, he can try to take me, and I'll make him regret it. The rest of the day passed in frantic preparation. Elena drilled her on combat forms until Lyra's muscles screamed. Theron pulled her aside to explain the rules. Challenges could be fought to submission or death, challenger's choice. Magnus had declared it a submission match, which meant he wanted her alive. That's not mercy, Theron warned. He wants to humiliate you, break you in front of witnesses so thoroughly that no one will question your return to Frostfang. Then I won't give him the chance. Easier said than done. That night, alone in her room, Lyra stared at her hands and tried not to panic. 1 month of training against a lifetime warrior. The odds were impossible, but she'd survived impossible before. She thought of the ice breaking beneath her feet, of diving into black water, of the heat burning through her veins when death seemed certain. That power was still inside her. She just had to find it again. Dawn came too fast. Lyra dressed in the clothes Elena had provided. Leather pants, a reinforced tunic, boots with good grip. No armor. She'd need to move fast. The arena was already packed when she arrived. Wolves from a dozen territories filled the stands, come to witness either her triumph or her destruction. The air buzzed with speculation. Magnus waited in the center of the ring, stripped to the waist, showing off the warrior's build he'd honed over years of training. He looked confident, relaxed even. Lyra stepped into the ring, and the crowd noise swelled. "Last chance to surrender," Magnus called. "Save yourself the beating." "I'll pass." A neutral alpha, one of the witnesses who'd sealed the challenge, stepped forward. "The rules are simple. Fight to submission. First one to yield or lose consciousness loses. Killing blows are forbidden. Do you both accept these terms?" "Accepted," Magnus said. "Accepted," Lyra echoed. "Then begin." Magnus moved first, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. His fist came at Lyra's face fast enough that she barely dodged. His follow-up caught her in the ribs, the same ribs Kael had kicked weeks ago. Pain exploded through her chest. She stumbled back, gasping. The crowd roared. Magnus pressed his advantage, driving her backward with a combination of strikes that Lyra could barely block. She was outmatched, outskilled. Every movement he made was practiced, precise. A particularly vicious hook caught her jaw and sent her sprawling. "Submit," Magnus said, standing over her. "This doesn't have to get worse." Lyra spat blood and climbed to her feet. Her jaw throbbed. Her ribs felt like they might crack with her next breath. But she wasn't done. She reached for that heat inside her, the burning cold that had saved her in the lake. It came easier this time, flooding through her veins like it had been waiting. Her hands began to frost over. "There it is," Magnus said softly. "The monster shows itself." He lunged. Lyra threw up her hands instinctively. Ice erupted between them, a wall of it, thick and solid, rising from the arena floor in seconds. Magnus's momentum carried him straight into it. He hit with a crack that made the crowd gasp. When he staggered back, there was frost on his knuckles where they'd impacted. "Nice trick," he said, "but tricks won't save you." He went low, sweeping her legs. Lyra hit the ground hard, her concentration shattering. The ice wall crumbled. Magnus was on her in a heartbeat, his weight pinning her down, his hand around her throat. "Submit," he growled. She couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. In seconds, she'd pass out. Lyra pressed both palms against his chest and released everything she had. Ice exploded outward. It coated Magnus's torso in seconds, spreading across his skin so fast he didn't have time to move. He tried to pull back, but the ice held him, creeping up his neck, down his arms, locking his joints in place. His eyes went wide with genuine fear. "Submit," Lyra rasped, her voice raw from his choking grip. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "I submit," he managed through ice-stiffened lips. The neutral alpha's voice rang out across the arena. "The challenger yields! Victory to Lyra Ashen!" The crowd erupted. Some cheering, some shouting in outrage. Lyra released the ice. It took concentration, but Elena's training held, and Magnus collapsed beside her, gasping. She stood on shaking legs, her entire body screaming in protest. Every part of her hurt, but she'd won. She'd actually won. Theron was suddenly there, steady hands on her shoulders. "Easy, you did it, but you're about to collapse." "I'm fine," she lied. "You're a terrible liar." He helped her toward the arena exit. Behind them, Magnus was being helped up by his wolves, his expression thunderous. The crowd parted as they passed, wolves staring at Lyra with new eyes. Not with pity anymore. Not with contempt, with respect. And maybe a little fear. Elena met them outside the arena, her expression caught between pride and concern. "That was reckless and stupid and absolutely incredible. How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a landslide." "Accurate? Come on. Let's get you checked over before you actually do collapse." They were halfway to the fortress when a voice called out behind them. "Wait." Lyra turned. Magnus stood 20 feet away, his escort hanging back. He looked different without the ice coating him, smaller somehow, despite his warrior's build. "What do you want?" Theron asked coldly. "To talk. Just for a moment." Magnus's eyes were on Lyra. "Alone." "Absolutely not," Theron started, but Lyra held up a hand. It's fine. I'll hear him out. She walked back toward Magnus, ignoring the concerned looks from both Theron and Elena. When she was close enough to speak without shouting, she stopped. Say what you came to say. Magnus was quiet for a moment, studying her face. I didn't expect you to win. I noticed. I thought... He stopped, started again. My father sent me. He wanted me to bring you back. Prove that Frostfang doesn't tolerate desertion. But standing in that ring, feeling that ice lock around me, he shook his head. You're not the same girl who scrubbed floors. No, I'm not. My father's afraid of you, of what you represent. A Frostborn who knows what she is, who's learning to use her power. That's his worst nightmare. Magnus took a step closer. He's going to come after you, not with challenges, with assassins, with poison, with whatever it takes to eliminate the threat.
Why are you telling me this? Because despite everything, I don't want you dead. His expression was complicated. What we did to you, what I let happen, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong even then, but I told myself it was necessary, that keeping you weak kept the pack safe. He laughed bitterly. Turns out we just created something far more dangerous. I'm not dangerous unless someone makes me be. I know, but my father won't believe that. Magnus stepped back. Watch yourself, Lyra. He won't stop until you're dead or back under his control. And he has allies, wolves who remember the Frostborn purges and think they were justified. Then they can come try, Lyra said quietly. I'm done being afraid. Magnus nodded slowly, something like admiration flickering across his face. Then he turned and walked back to his escort. Moments later, they were gone, riding back toward Frostfang territory. Theron appeared at Lyra's side. What did he want? To warn me. His father's going to escalate. Of course he is. Garrick doesn't know how to back down. Theron's jaw tightened. We'll increase security. Put guards on your quarters. Make sure... No. He stopped. No? I appreciate the concern, but I'm not hiding behind guards. Lyra met his eyes. I spent 20 years being protected by staying invisible. That's over. If Garrick wants me dead, let him come himself. Let him try to kill me face to face. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way this ends. She started walking toward the fortress. I beat Magnus today. That proved I'm not helpless anymore. But it also proved I'm a threat. And threats get eliminated unless they become too dangerous to touch. So your plan is to become so dangerous no one dares attack you. My plan is to become strong enough that I get to choose my own fate. Lyra looked back at him. Isn't that what you offered me? A chance to find out who I really am? Theron studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, proud and fierce. You're going to be terrifying when we're done with your training. Good. I'm tired of being scared. The next weeks passed in a blur of intensive training. Elena pushed her harder. Now that she'd proven she could handle combat pressure, the exercises became more complex, the expectations higher. Lyra met every challenge. Word of her victory over Magnus spread through the territories like wildfire. Other packs sent observers to watch her train. Some came curious. Others came skeptical. All left impressed. The whispers started. The Frostborn has returned. The old blood lives again. Not everyone was pleased. Messages arrived from conservative alphas demanding Theron suppress Lyra's abilities, claiming Frostborn were too dangerous to exist. He burned each one publicly and dared anyone to challenge his decision. No one did. Not yet. 2 months after the challenge, Elena declared Lyra ready for advanced combat training. They sparred daily now, and while Elena still won every match, the victories were getting harder earned. You're going to surpass me soon, the teacher said one morning, breathing hard after a particularly brutal session. Maybe another year of training. You'll still be faster. Speed isn't everything. You have raw power I'll never match. Elena helped her up. The question is what you do with it. Power without purpose is just destruction. What should my purpose be? That's not for me to decide. Elena sheathed her practice blade. But I'd suggest figuring it out before someone decides it for you. That night, Lyra stood on her balcony watching the city below. Lights flickered in hundreds of windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Wolves moved through the streets going about their lives. Somewhere out there, Garrick was plotting.
Magnus had warned her. Theron had confirmed it through his intelligence network. An attack was coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when it came, Lyra would be ready. She raised her hand, palm up, and focused. Ice crystals formed in the air above her skin, beautiful, delicate, deadly. With barely a thought, she could turn them into weapons. Could freeze an enemy where they stood. Could bring winter itself to her defense. The power no longer scared her. She'd learned to control it, to shape it, to make it hers. She closed her fist and the crystals fell like snow, melting before they hit the ground. Tomorrow, she'd train again, push harder, get stronger. Because Magnus was right about one thing. She wasn't the same girl who'd scrubbed floors. She was something else now, something that refused to be broken. And anyone who tried would learn that lesson the hard way. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when the moon was dark and the temperature dropped low enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. Lyra woke to the smell of smoke. She was on her feet before conscious thought caught up, her power already surging through her veins in response to the danger her body sensed before her mind understood. The suite door burst open and Elena charged in, blade drawn, her face grim. "We're under attack. 20 wolves, maybe more." They breached the outer walls. Garrick's assassins? Worse. Elena grabbed Lyra's arm, hauling her toward the door. It's Garrick himself. He brought his best warriors, and he's carving through our defenses like they're nothing. He wants you, Lyra, and he's willing to burn this fortress down to get you. They ran through corridors thick with smoke. Somewhere below, steel rang against steel. Wolves snarled and screamed. The fortress that had felt like sanctuary was turning into a war zone. "Where's Theron?" Lyra asked, coughing as smoke burned her lungs. "Fighting, trying to hold the main hall." Elena kicked open a door that led to a servant's stairwell. "He told me to get you out. There's an escape route through the kitchens that leads to—" "No." Elena stopped so fast Lyra nearly crashed into her. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not running." Lyra pulled free of Elena's grip. "Garrick came here for me. People are dying because of me. I'm not going to hide while others fight my battles. You'll die if you face him. He's an alpha with 30 years of combat experience. Then I'll die fighting instead of running." Lyra met her teacher's eyes. "You told me to find my purpose. Well, I found it. I'm done being prey, done letting others suffer for my existence. If Garrick wants me, he can have me, but I'm going to make him work for it." Elena stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, fierce and proud. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both." "Good. I like those odds better." Elena reversed direction, heading back toward the main hall. "Stay behind me, and for the love of winter, don't die before we get there." They emerged onto a balcony overlooking the great hall, and the scene below stole Lyra's breath. The hall was chaos. Theron's wolves fought desperately against Frostfang warriors who moved with brutal efficiency. Bodies littered the floor, some moving, some not. Blood stained the ancient stones. And in the center of it all stood Garrick, his massive frame cutting down anyone who came near. He fought like a natural disaster, all unstoppable force and ruthless precision. 2 of Theron's elite guard lay broken at his feet. Theron himself was locked in combat with 3 Frostfang warriors, keeping them from reaching the injured wolves behind him. Even from here, Lyra could see he was tiring. Blood ran down his arm from a deep gash. "We need to even the odds," Elena said, knocking an arrow. "Stay here. I'm going—" Lyra vaulted over the balcony railing. The drop was 15 feet. She landed in a crouch, the impact sending shock waves through her legs, and rose with ice already forming around her hands. The hall went silent. Every eye turned toward her. Friend and enemy alike, all staring at the Frostborn girl who'd just thrown herself into the middle of a war. Garrick's lips pulled back from his teeth in something that might have been a smile. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd run." "I'm done running from you." Lyra's voice carried across the hall, steady despite her racing heart. "You want me? Here I am. Let everyone else go." "Everyone else?" Garrick gestured to the carnage around him. "They're already dead or dying. You think I came all this way just to leave empty-handed? I think you came here to prove a point, to show that Frostborn are too dangerous to exist." Lyra took a step forward. Ice crept across the floor beneath her feet, spreading in spiral patterns. So prove it. Fight me. Right here. Right now. You win. You take me back to Frostfang and do whatever you want. I win. You leave and never come back. You can't beat him, Theron said urgently, breaking free of his opponents for a moment. Lyra, don't. She knows she can't beat me, Garrick interrupted. She's buying time, trying to give her new pack a chance to regroup. He laughed, the sound ugly and cold. How noble. How utterly pointless. He moved. 1 second he was 20 feet away. The next he was on top of her, his hand closing around her throat with crushing force. He lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. Did you really think 2 months of training would be enough? He snarled in her face. I've been killing since before you were born. You're still nothing. Still weak. Still... Lyra grabbed his wrist with both hands and released everything she had. Ice exploded between them. It didn't just coat Garrick's arm, it consumed it, spreading up past his elbow in seconds. He roared and tried to throw her, but the ice had locked his joints solid. She hit the ground hard, rolling, gasping for air. Garrick stared at his frozen arm in disbelief. Then he raised his other hand and brought it down like a hammer, shattering the ice completely. Nice trick, he said, shaking off the fragments. But tricks won't save you. He charged. Lyra threw up an ice wall, but he crashed through it like it was paper. His fist caught her in the ribs, the same ribs that had been broken and bruised a dozen times before, and she felt something crack. Pain exploded through her chest. She stumbled back, blood filling her mouth. You should have stayed in that closet room, Garrick said, stalking toward her. Should have accepted your place, but you had to make yourself visible. Had to prove you were special. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. You're not special. You're just a mistake that survived longer than you should have. Blood dripped from Lyra's mouth onto the stones. Her vision was going gray at the edges. Every breath felt like knives. But beneath the pain, beneath the fear, something else was building. That heat she'd felt in the lake. The burning cold that had saved her twice before. Except this time it wasn't just a trickle. It was a flood. Power surged through her veins like a dam breaking. The air around her dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. Frost spread across every surface, the floor, the walls, the weapons scattered across the hall. Garrick's eyes went wide. What? Lyra grabbed his wrist with both hands. Ice consumed him, not gradually like before, instantly. It swallowed his arm, his chest, his legs, encasing him completely in a prison of solid ice so thick it looked black in places. His eyes were the only thing still mobile, wide with genuine terror. You're right about one thing, Lyra said, her voice rough but steady. I am a mistake. Your mistake. You thought you could poison me into nothing. Thought you could beat me into silence. Thought you could make me so small that I'd never be a threat. She tightened her grip and the ice crept higher toward his throat. But every time you hurt me, every time you starved me, every time you made me wish I was dead, you were just making me stronger, teaching me to survive. And now I've survived you. The ice reached his chin. Garrick tried to speak, but his jaw was frozen shut. I should kill you, Lyra continued. For my parents. For 20 years of torture. For every bruise and every scar. I should freeze you solid and shatter you into pieces so small they'd never find all of you. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. But I'm not going to. Because I'm not like you. I don't murder children and call it protection. I don't torture the weak and call it strength. So here's what's going to happen instead. Lyra released him. The ice remained for a moment, then shattered all at once, falling away in chunks. Garrick collapsed to his knees, gasping, his entire body shaking from the cold. You're going to leave, Lyra said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. You and your warriors are going to walk out of here and never come back. You're going to tell everyone that you challenged me and I beat you. That the Frostborn you tried to destroy is stronger than any alpha. And if you ever come after me or mine again, I won't stop with freezing. I'll turn you into ice and leave you that way until you forget what warmth feels like. Do you understand? Garrick looked up at her, and for the first time in her life, Lyra saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine, bone-deep fear. I understand, he rasped. Good. Now get out. He climbed to his feet slowly, his movements stiff. Around him, his warriors were staring at Lyra like she'd grown a second head. No one moved to help their alpha. No one spoke. "Move!" Garrick ordered his wolves, his voice hoarse. "We're leaving." They retreated toward the entrance, dragging their wounded with them. The hall remained silent except for their footsteps and the crackle of melting ice. At the doorway, Garrick paused. He looked back at Lyra one last time, and something complicated flickered across his face. Not quite respect, not quite regret, but acknowledgement, at least. Then he was gone, and the Frostfang wolves with him. The moment the door closed, Lyra's legs gave out. She hit the floor hard, her broken ribs screaming in protest. The power that had flooded through her drained away all at once, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Theron was there in seconds, catching her before she could collapse completely. "Get the healers!" he shouted. "Now!" "I'm okay," Lyra managed, though that was clearly a lie. "Just tired." "You just beat an alpha in single combat while barely able to stand." Theron's hands were gentle as he checked her injuries. "You're not okay. You're half dead and too stubborn to admit it." "But I won." She smiled despite the pain. "I actually won." "Yes, you did." He said it with something like wonder. "Though for a minute there, I thought we were planning your funeral." Healers rushed in, their hands already glowing with the soft light that meant magic was being channeled. They swarmed Lyra, assessing damage, muttering among themselves about broken ribs and internal bleeding and shock. "Will she live?" Elena asked, appearing from somewhere. She had blood on her face, but seemed otherwise unhurt. "She'll live," the head healer confirmed, "though she's going to be laid up for at least a week. These injuries can wait until you're somewhere more comfortable," Theron interrupted. He scooped Lyra up carefully, ignoring her weak protests. "Let's get you back to your rooms. You can rest while they work." The next several hours passed in a fog of pain and healing magic. The healers set her ribs, closed the cuts, dealt with the internal damage Garrick's blows had caused. Through it all, Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of voices around her but unable to focus on what they were saying. When she finally woke fully, morning light was streaming through her windows. Her body ached, but it was the dull ache of healing rather than the sharp pain of fresh injury. Elena sat in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted but alert. "Welcome back to the living." "How long was I out?" "About 16 hours. The healer said you'd need sleep more than anything else." Elena leaned forward. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a herd of elk." Lyra tried to sit up, winced, and settled for propping herself up on pillows instead. "What happened after I passed out? How many did we lose?" 12 dead, 20 injured, most of them not seriously." Elena's expression was grim. "It could have been worse. If you hadn't drawn Garrick away from the main fight..." "Don't. I didn't do anything special. You beat an alpha who was trying to kill you while you had broken ribs and could barely breathe." Elena's voice was firm. "That's the definition of special. Own it." Before Lyra could respond, the door opened and Theron entered carrying a tray laden with food. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "You're awake. Good." He set the tray down. "Eat. You need to rebuild your strength." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway. That's not a request." The food was simple but good. Broth, bread, cheese. Lyra forced herself to eat despite her protesting stomach. Theron and Elena watched in silence until she'd finished at least half of it. "Better?" Theron asked. "Better," she admitted. "Now tell me what I don't know. What's happened since last night?" "Word spread fast," Elena said, "about you beating Garrick. By sunrise, messengers were arriving from a dozen different packs wanting to know if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That the Frostborn bloodline has returned. That you defeated one of the strongest alphas in the territories with ice magic." Theron's expression was carefully neutral. "Some see it as a threat. Others see it as an opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" "Alliance. Protection. Access to power they don't have." He moved to the window, looking out over the city. "Like it or not, Lyra, what you did last night made you famous. Or infamous, depending on who you ask. The quiet servant girl is gone. Now you're a player in pack politics, whether you want to be or not." The weight of those words settled over Lyra like a heavy cloak. She'd wanted to stop being invisible, wanted to be strong enough that no one could hurt her. But she hadn't considered what that strength would cost, the attention it would draw, the expectations it would create. "What if I don't want to be a player?" she asked quietly. "Then you'd better learn to disappoint people." Theron turned back to face her. "Because they're going to want things from you now. Your power, your allegiance, your validation of their causes. And when you say no, because you will have to say no sometimes, they're going to get angry. So I traded one kind of danger for another. Yes, but this time you have the power to defend yourself." He crossed back to the bed, his expression serious. "Which brings me to my next question. What do you want, Lyra? Not what others want from you, not what you think you should want. What do you actually want?" She'd never been asked that before, never been given the space to consider it. What did she want? Not revenge. She'd had Garrick helpless and chosen mercy instead. Not power for its own sake, the ice magic was a tool, not a goal. "I want a home," she said finally. "A real one. Where I don't have to hide or apologize for existing. Where I'm surrounded by people who see me as a person, not a threat or a tool or a mistake." She met Theron's eyes. "I want what you gave me these last few months. Safety, purpose, the chance to be something other than afraid." "Then you have it." The words were simple but carried absolute certainty. "This is your home for as long as you want it. No conditions, no expectations beyond what you choose to take on yourself. And if others disagree, if keeping me here causes problems for your pack, then we'll handle those problems together." Theron's smile was slight but genuine. "Besides, after last night, I don't think many wolves will be eager to challenge us. You made quite an impression." Over the next few days, Lyra's prediction proved true. Messengers arrived constantly, some bearing formal greetings, others bringing challenges or threats. Theron handled them all with diplomatic efficiency, making it clear that Lyra was under his protection, and any attack on her would be considered an attack on his entire pack. Most backed down. A few didn't. Those few learned why challenging the Alpha King was considered a fatal mistake. Lyra healed slowly. Her ribs knitted back together under the healer's care. The bruises faded. The cuts became scars that would probably never fully disappear. She didn't mind the scars. They were proof she'd survived. 2 weeks after the attack, Elena declared her fit to return to training. They started slowly, basic forms, simple exercises, but within days they were back to full intensity. "You're faster than before," Elena observed during one particularly brutal sparring session. "The fight with Garrick, it changed something, like your body finally understood what it was capable of. Or maybe I just got tired of being hit. That too." Elena lunged, her blade whistling toward Lyra's head. Lyra blocked with a shield of ice, then countered with a blast of cold that made Elena dance backward. "Good. Again." They trained for hours until both were exhausted and the courtyard was littered with broken ice. "You're ready," Elena said as they cooled down. "Not for everything. You'll be learning for years still, but ready to stand on your own, to defend yourself without help." She paused. "I'm proud of you, in case I haven't said that enough." "You've said it plenty." "Well, I'm saying it again. You came here broken and scared and barely able to stand. Now you're one of the strongest fighters I've ever trained. That's not all me. That's you, your determination, your refusal to give up." Elena gripped her shoulder. "Whatever comes next, you'll handle it. I believe that." What came next arrived sooner than expected. 1 month after Garrick's failed attack, formal invitations began arriving. Packs across the territories were holding a grand assembly, a gathering of all major alphas to discuss territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and political alliances. And they'd specifically requested Lyra's presence. "It's a power play," Theron explained, reading through one of the invitations. "They want to see you for themselves. Judge whether you're a threat or an asset." "Do I have to go?" "Technically, no, but refusing would make you look weak or afraid, and weakness invites attack." He set the invitation aside. "If you do go, it'll be dangerous. There will be wolves there who remember the old purges and think they were justified. Wolves who'd be happy to see the Frostborn bloodline die out completely." "Sounds like fun." "I'm serious, Lyra. This isn't a sparring match. It's politics at the highest level. One wrong word could start a war." "Then I'll be careful with my words." She stood, moving to the window. The city spread below, peaceful and thriving. Her home now, worth protecting. When is it? 3 weeks. In neutral territory, the ancient gathering grounds where our ancestors used to meet. Theron joined her at the window. I'll be there as well, obviously, and I can bring a small retinue, which will include you and Elena. What about everyone else who wanted me to come? The packs that sent invitations? They'll expect you to present yourself formally, give a statement of your intentions, prove you're not a threat. His expression was grim. Essentially, you'll be on trial, and the judges will be wolves who've spent their lives fearing what you represent. Great, no pressure. Despite the joke, Lyra's stomach was tight with anxiety. Facing Garrick in combat was one thing. Facing a hall full of alphas in a political arena was something else entirely. The next 3 weeks passed in intensive preparation. Theron drilled her on pack politics and diplomatic protocols. Elena continued combat training, pushing her harder than ever. Kara helped her select formal clothing appropriate for such a gathering, leather and furs that were practical but rich, marking her as someone important. The night before they were set to leave, Lyra stood on her balcony watching the sun set behind the mountains. Tomorrow, everything would change again, one way or another. Nervous? She turned. Theron stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight from inside. Terrified, she admitted. What if I mess this up, say the wrong thing, offend the wrong alpha? Then we'll deal with it. Together. He moved to stand beside her. You're not alone in this, Lyra. Whatever happens tomorrow, you have a pack behind you, people who believe in you. Why? Why do you believe in me? Because you pulled me from freezing water when everyone else had given up. Because you chose mercy when revenge would have been justified. Because every time someone tells you that you can't do something, you prove them wrong. He turned to face her. You're stronger than you know. And tomorrow you're going to show everyone else what I've known since the day you dove into that lake. What's that? That the invisible girl was never weak. She was just waiting for her moment. The journey to the gathering grounds took 2 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. Other packs were converging from all directions. Lyra could see their camps dotting the landscape, their fires lighting up the darkness. The grounds themselves were ancient. Stone circles marked places where councils had been held for thousands of years. The air felt heavy here, charged with the weight of history. Tents had been erected in careful formation, each pack claiming their designated space, maintaining the formal distances that politics required. Theron's pack set up on the eastern edge, their position reflecting his status as Alpha King. Lyra helped with the setup, grateful for the distraction, but she could feel eyes watching her. Wolves from other packs observing, assessing, judging. The formal gathering would take place tomorrow at noon. Until then, it was all posturing and social maneuvering. Stay close, Elena murmured as they moved through the camps. Don't engage with anyone unless Theron's present. Some of these packs, they'll try to provoke you into doing something stupid. I'll behave. I know you will. I'm just saying, if someone does push too hard, you have permission to freeze their feet to the ground. Despite her nerves, Lyra smiled. That night, she barely slept. Every sound outside her tent had her reaching for her power, ready to defend herself. But nothing happened. Dawn came quietly, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The gathering began precisely at noon. The main stone circle had been set up with formal seating. Alphas in the center ring, their key advisors and warriors in the outer ring. Observers and witnesses filled the spaces beyond that. Hundreds of wolves, all watching as the business of the territories was conducted. Lyra sat in the outer ring beside Elena, trying to make herself small, despite knowing it was pointless. Every eye in the circle had found her at least once. Some looked curious, others hostile. A few showed barely concealed fear. The first several hours were tedious. Territorial disputes, trade agreements, boring political maneuvering that made Lyra's head ache. But she endured, staying quiet, staying alert. Then one of the conservative alphas, an ancient wolf named Corvian who ruled the western mountains, stood to address the assembly. We've discussed borders and trade, he said, his voice carrying across the circle. But we've ignored the real issue, the threat in our midst. The temperature in the circle seemed to drop. There's a frostborn among us, Corvin continued. For the first time in 200 years, one of the old bloodline walks freely. And we're supposed to pretend this isn't a problem? It's not a problem, Theron said calmly, not standing. Lyra Ashen is a member of my pack and under my protection. She poses no threat to anyone. She froze Alpha Garrick solid. That sounds like a threat to me. She defended herself from an assassin who broke into my fortress trying to kill her. Theron's voice had gone cold. Or are we now condemning people for the crime of not dying when attacked? Mutters rippled through the assembly. Some agreeing, others clearly supporting Corvin's position. The Frostborn were purged for a reason, another Alpha called out. They were too powerful, too dangerous. Letting one live is an insult to our ancestors who died stopping them. Your ancestors were murderers, Lyra heard herself say. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Every head turned toward her. Elena's hand gripped her arm in warning, but Lyra shook it off and stood. If she was going to be condemned anyway, she might as well say her piece. The Frostborn weren't dangerous because they had power, she said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. They were dangerous because they refused to be controlled. They questioned authority. They protected the weak. They stood up to alphas who thought strength gave them the right to do whatever they wanted. So your ancestors killed them. Murdered entire families, hunted children. She looked directly at Corvin. And you want me to apologize for surviving that genocide? Your existence threatens the natural order. I'm not a threat. I'm a person. And if treating me like a person threatens your natural order, maybe your order is the problem. The assembly erupted. Half the wolves started shouting at once, some in support, others in outrage. Alphas lunged to their feet. Weapons were halfway drawn before cooler heads intervened. Theron rose, his presence commanding immediate silence. Enough! We're not here to relitigate the past. Lyra Ashen has committed no crime, threatened no pack. She exists, and that's not illegal no matter how uncomfortable it makes some of you. So we're supposed to just accept her? Corvin demanded. Pretend everything's fine while she grows stronger? What happens when she decides our packs are the problem? Then we'll deal with it, another Alpha said, a younger wolf from the Eastern Territories. But punishing someone for crimes they haven't committed and might never commit? That's not justice. That's just fear. Easy for you to say. Your pack isn't close enough to be her first target. If she wanted to attack someone, she'd have killed Garrick when she had the chance, the young Alpha shot back. Instead, she let him live. That shows more restraint than half the wolves in this circle. The debate raged for hours. Lyra stood in the center of it, feeling like she was being pulled apart by the competing voices. Some wolves defended her, others called for her death. Most seemed unsure, swaying between the two extremes. Finally, as the sun began to set, Theron called for a formal vote. We can't force unanimity, he said, but we can establish a standard. I propose that Lyra Ashen be formally recognized as a free member of the Northern Territories, with all rights and protections that entails. Any attack on her will be treated as an attack on my pack and responded to accordingly. He looked around the circle. All in favor? The vote was close. Too close. But in the end, enough alphas raised their hands to form a majority. Opposed? Corvin's hand shot up, along with several others. But they were outnumbered. The motion carries, Theron declared. Lyra Ashen is under the protection of territorial law. This matter is closed. But Lyra could see it in Corvin's eyes. This wasn't over. Not really. They'd won the political battle. But the ideological war was just beginning. The gathering continued for 2 more days, but the tension never fully dissipated. Lyra kept to Theron's camp, avoiding unnecessary interaction. When they finally packed up to leave, she felt only relief. The journey back to Iron Peak was quiet. Elena seemed lost in thought. Theron was carefully neutral. I made things worse, Lyra said on the second night, staring into their campfire. By speaking up, I should have stayed quiet. You told the truth, Elena said. That's never wrong. It is if it puts the pack in danger. The pack was already in danger the moment you walked into that circle. Theron poked at the fire with a stick. Corvin and his allies were always going to push for your execution. You speaking up didn't change that, but it did give the moderate wolves a reason to support you. Showed them you're not just a dangerous unknown. You're a person with thoughts and feelings and the right to defend yourself. So what happens now? Now we go home. We continue your training, and we wait to see if the conservative packs make good on their threats.
He looked at her across the flames. But whatever comes, we face it together. That's what pack means. 3 months passed in relative peace. Lyra continued training with Elena, pushing her abilities further every day. She could create complex ice structures now, walls, weapons, even temporary bridges. Her control had improved to the point where she rarely had accidental outbursts anymore.
Word from the territories was mixed. Some packs were cautiously accepting her existence. Others were openly hostile. But no one had moved against her directly. Then, 6 months after the assembly, messengers arrived bearing news that changed everything. Alpha Garrick was dead. He'd been found in his chambers, frozen solid. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. Just a corpse encased in ice so thick it had taken them 3 days to thaw him enough for a burial. And everyone assumed Lyra had killed him. "I didn't," she said immediately when Theron told her. "I swear I didn't." "I know. You were here training with Elena. You have witnesses." Theron's face was grim. "But that won't matter to his pack. They'll want revenge, and the conservative alphas will use this as proof that you're dangerous. But I didn't do it." "Doesn't matter. Someone with ice magic killed a prominent alpha. You're the only Frostborn anyone knows about. Therefore, you're guilty." He slammed his fist on the table. "It's a setup. Someone's trying to frame you. Force a confrontation." "Who would—" Lyra stopped. "Magnus." "What?" "Magnus warned me. Said his father would come after me. Maybe—" She struggled to make sense of it. "Maybe he was protecting me. Getting rid of the threat before it could kill me. Or maybe it was someone else entirely, trying to start a war." Elena crossed her arms. "Either way, Frostfang will be out for blood. And they won't care about evidence." She was right. Within a week, formal accusations arrived. Frostfang demanded Lyra be turned over for trial. 6 other packs echoed the demand. Theron refused. "She's innocent until proven guilty. And since no one has any actual proof, I'm not handing her over to be executed based on speculation." His refusal triggered exactly the confrontation someone had been hoping for. Conservative packs united behind Frostfang. A coalition formed, demanding either Lyra's surrender or Theron's abdication. "We can fight them," Elena said during a war council. "We have the advantage of position, better training." "We'd lose," Theron said flatly. "Not militarily, but politically. Even if we won every battle, we'd be labeled as tyrants. Other packs would turn against us. We'd end up isolated and vulnerable." "So what do we do?" Lyra asked. "I can't let you start a war over me." "You're not starting anything. They are." But Theron's expression was troubled. "We need to find out who actually killed Garrick. Prove your innocence definitively." The investigation took weeks. Theron sent his best trackers to Frostfang territory. They interviewed witnesses, examined the crime scene, followed every lead. What they found was damning. The ice that had killed Garrick matched Lyra's signature perfectly. Whoever had done it was either a Frostborn themselves or had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like one. "There's one other possibility," the lead investigator said reluctantly. "Your father. If he survived the purges and went into hiding, he might have—" "My father is dead," Lyra interrupted. "Both my parents are dead. I'm the last one." "Are you sure?" The question haunted her. What if there were other Frostborn survivors? What if someone was out there using their shared power to frame her? The answer came from an unexpected source. Magnus arrived at the fortress alone in the dead of night, demanding to speak with Lyra. Guards nearly killed him on sight before Theron intervened. 5 minutes, the king said coldly. Then you leave or die. Choose wisely. Magnus looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were haunted. I know who killed my father, he said without preamble. And you need to stop them before they destroy everything. Lyra's blood went cold. Who? My sister, Vera. You don't have a sister? Yes, I do. Had. Officially, she died in childbirth 23 years ago. Actually, my father discovered she was Frostborn, half-blood, from an affair my mother had. He couldn't kill her without revealing the affair, so he imprisoned her instead, kept her locked in these deep cells, poisoned and suppressed just like he did to you. Magnus's hands were shaking. But after you escaped, After you proved what a Frostborn could become, she got ideas, started planning, and 3 months ago she broke free. How? I helped her. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I thought if I freed her, gave her a chance to live, it would make up for what we did to you. I didn't know she'd... He stopped, shaking his head. She killed him, our father, used her power to make it look like you did it. Then she disappeared. Why? Lyra demanded. Why frame me? Because she wants war. Wants the packs to tear themselves apart fighting over you while she picks through the ruins. Magnus looked up, his eyes desperate. She's insane, Lyra. Decades of imprisonment and torture broke something in her. She thinks if she destroys enough, if she burns down the old order completely, the Frostborn can rise again. But all she'll do is get you killed and start a war that'll slaughter thousands. Theron and Elena had been listening in silence. Now the king stepped forward. Where is she? I don't know, but she'll strike again, soon. She wants to push things past the point of negotiation. Magnus turned to Lyra. You need to find her. Stop her. You're the only one who can match her power. And if I can't, then we're all dead. Magnus left the same way he'd come, alone, in darkness. Lyra watched him go, her mind spinning. A sister. Another Frostborn. One who'd suffered even worse than she had. And now that sister was trying to start a war in her name. We need to find her, Theron said, before she kills again. But finding Vera proved impossible. She struck twice more in the following month, both times targeting conservative alphas who'd called for Lyra's death. Both times, the murders were brutal and flashy, clearly meant to inflame tensions. The Coalition's demands grew louder. Turn over Lyra or face consequences. Theron continued to refuse, but cracks were forming in his support. Even wolves loyal to him were questioning whether protecting one person was worth risking everyone else. Maybe I should turn myself in, Lyra said one night. End this before it gets worse. They'd execute you within an hour, Elena said flatly. No trial, no evidence, just revenge. But if I don't, we find another way. Theron's voice was firm. We always find another way. The another way found them 3 days later when Vera attacked the fortress itself. She came at midnight with 10 wolves she'd recruited, outcasts and criminals, promised power and revenge. They breached the outer walls using ice magic that cracked stone like paper. Alarms shrieked, warriors poured into the courtyards, and Lyra ran toward the fighting instead of away from it. She found Vera in this main courtyard, surrounded by ice sculptures that had once been wolves. The woman looked like Lyra's dark reflection, same build, same features, but twisted by years of hate into something barely recognizable as human. There you are, Vera said, her voice eerily calm. The golden child, the one who got to be free while I rotted in darkness. I didn't know you existed, Lyra said, keeping her hands visible, power already building in her veins. If I had, you'd have done nothing, just like everyone else. Vera raised her hands and ice erupted from the ground, sharp spears aimed directly at Lyra. Lyra threw up a shield, deflecting the attack. I know what they did to you. I know what it's like to be hurt and used and treated like you're nothing. But this, killing innocents, starting wars, it won't fix what was broken. I don't want to fix it. Vera's laugh was bitter and broken. I want to burn it all down, and I'm going to use you to do it. When they finally kill you, when they execute the innocent Frostborn girl, the guilt will eat them alive. The Coalition will fracture, and in the chaos, I'll be free to do whatever I want. I'm not going to die. Then I'll kill you myself. Vera attacked with everything she had, ice storms, frozen spears, walls that tried to crush Lyra between them. It was brutal, uncontrolled power unleashed by someone who'd given up on everything except destruction. Lyra fought back with the control Elena had drilled into her. Precise strikes, efficient defense, turning Vera's wild attacks against her. They were evenly matched. For every wall Lyra created, Vera shattered it. For every attack Lyra deflected, Vera launched 2 more. The courtyard became a war zone of ice and fury. Then Vera made a mistake. She overextended, putting too much power into a single massive attack. Lyra saw the opening and took it. She didn't try to match Vera's power. Instead, she did something Elena had taught her weeks ago. She redirected it. The massive ice spear Vera had created hit Lyra's shield and bounced back, redirected with all its original force, plus the momentum from Lyra's deflection. It took Vera in the shoulder, piercing clean through, pinning her to the courtyard wall. Vera screamed. The sound was anguish and rage mixed together into something barely human. Lyra approached slowly, her hand still crackling with power. "It's over. It's never over," Vera gasped. Blood ran down the ice spear, freezing as it dripped. "You think this changes anything? They'll still hate you, still fear you. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the knife." "Maybe, but at least I'll be alive to worry about it." Lyra crouched beside her. "And I'll be surrounded by people who chose to stand with me instead of against me. Can you say the same?" Vera's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to be free." "I know. I wanted that too." Lyra placed her hand on the ice spear. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. Sorry no one saved you sooner, but I can't let you hurt anyone else." She shattered the spear. Vera collapsed, unconscious from pain and blood loss. Healers rushed forward immediately. Behind them, Theron appeared, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Will she live?" he asked. "Probably," the head healer confirmed, "though she'll need extensive care." "Then give it to her. Put her somewhere secure where she can't hurt herself or others, and when she's stable, we'll figure out what comes next." The aftermath was complicated. With Vera captured and the truth revealed, the coalition demanding Lyra's death lost much of its support. Conservative alphas couldn't maintain their accusations when the real killer was in custody. But the damage was done. Trust between packs had fractured. Old alliances had collapsed. The territories were more divided than they'd been in generations. It took months of diplomatic maneuvering to piece things back together. Theron worked tirelessly, negotiating with moderate alphas, isolating the hardliners, slowly rebuilding consensus. And through it all, Lyra trained, grew stronger, became the person Theron had seen in her that day on the ice. 1 year after Garrick's attack on the fortress, the territories held another grand assembly. This time, Lyra entered not as someone on trial, but as a recognized member of Theron's inner circle. The vote this time was unanimous. Lyra Ashen was a free citizen of the Northern Territories, with all rights and protections that entailed. Any attack on her would be treated as an attack on the territories themselves. It wasn't perfect. Corvin and his allies still muttered about Frostborn threats. Vera remained imprisoned, her future uncertain. The wounds from everything that had happened would take years to fully heal. But standing in that stone circle, surrounded by wolves who'd chosen to accept her existence, Lyra felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she belonged. That night, back in Iron Peak, Theron asked her to walk with him through the city. They moved through streets she'd come to know, past shops and homes where people lived and loved and built lives worth living. "I have a proposition," he said as they climbed toward the fortress, "and I want you to think carefully before answering." "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that involves binding our packs together permanently." He stopped, turning to face her. "Marry me, Lyra. Not because of politics or alliances or any of that nonsense, but because I care about you. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because when I almost drowned in that lake, you dove in to save me, and I've been falling ever since." Lyra stared at him, her heart hammering. "You want to marry me?" "Yes, if you'll have me." She thought about everything that had happened. The pain and the triumph, the terror and the hope, the long road from servant to survivor to something she still couldn't quite name. And she thought about Theron, who'd offered her protection when no one else would, who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, who'd stood beside her through everything without flinching. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you." His smile was brighter than sunrise. He pulled her close, kissing her under stars that had witnessed 1,000 years of pack history, and Lyra kissed him back, tasting possibility and promise and a future she'd never imagined she could have. The wedding took place 3 months later, on the same frozen lake where everything had begun. Wolves from dozens of packs attended, some celebrating, some there out of political necessity, but all witnessing the impossible. A Frostborn and an Alpha King, united. Lyra wore white furs trimmed with silver, her dark hair braided with ice crystals that never melted. She looked like winter personified, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. When Theron took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice carried across the silent crowd. I pledge my strength to yours, my pack to your protection, my life to our future. Lyra's voice was steady as she answered, I pledge my power to our people, my loyalty to our pack, my heart to you for as long as we both survive. They sealed the vows with a kiss as ice crystals fell from clear sky, swirling around them in patterns that looked almost alive. The girl who'd been nothing became a queen, and the pack that had tried to destroy her knelt in the snow, acknowledging what they should have seen from the beginning. Lyra Ashen was never weak. She was just waiting for her moment to rise.